The most beautiful girl in school came running to my door in that heavy downpour, just so she could stay at my house for one night. But I had turned her away. The very next day, she was brutally murdered in my alley. From that day on, I lived in constant regret. After joining the police academy, I searched for that killer like a madman. But the rain that night had washed away all the clues. For a full 10 years, I couldn't find a single lead. But then, a bolt of lightning from the sky brought me right back to that exact same crossroads of fate. The moment I returned to my high school days, the very first thing I did was sprint toward the door. As soon as I opened it, Seraphine was standing right there. "Valen, I heard your parents went out of town for business and you are home alone. Can I stay at your place for a few days? I will do all the chores around the house in return." I looked at the girl standing before me, and my hands reached out to touch her completely on their own. Seraphine tried to step back in panic, but she needed my help, so she forced herself to stay still. When my fingers brushed against her, her skin was freezing cold. The faint trembling of her body told me clearly that she was still alive, and that I had truly traveled back into my past. In my previous life, I had refused to let her stay at my house, and the very next day, she was mercilessly murdered on the street. That was the exact reason I went to the police academy and spent 10 years investigating that case. But the heavy rain that night had erased all the evidence. "Sorry," Seraphine said as she anxiously began to back away, but her foot slipped, and she started falling backward. I quickly grabbed her waist and pulled her into my arms. Amidst the roaring sound of the heavy rain, a strange silence fell over the two of us. She was so terrified in my arms that she didn't even dare to move. I immediately pulled my hands away and stepped back slightly from the light. "You were shivering from the cold, so I just did that to give you a little warmth." "I am sorry," Seraphine replied softly. "It's okay." I stepped aside, clearing the way for her to come inside. The color had completely drained from her face. Seeing her like this, old memories began to spin rapidly in my mind. In my past life, that killer had vanished forever after committing the murder in this city. But this time, I wasn't just going to save her. I was going to use my years of police experience to track down that killer tonight. Seraphine stood nervously in the entryway, tugging at the corner of her shirt. When I turned to get some slippers for her, she grew even more panicked. "My socks are wet. Your slippers will get dirty. I will just come in barefoot. I can mop the floor later." Being completely soaked and entirely alone in a house with a boy on this stormy night made her feel incredibly unsafe. To keep herself calm, she dug her fingernails deep into her palms. The moment I turned my back, her eyes quickly scanned the entire house. It was only when her gaze fell upon the warm tea and scattered boxes resting on the table that the tension in her back finally began to ease. Handing her a towel, I said, "If you don't mind, dry your hair first." She hesitated before asking, "Could you lend me some clothes to wear? My clothes are completely soaked." That was when I finally noticed just how tightly she was clutching her wet shirt. I replied, "You need to change your clothes anyway, so why don't you take a hot bath? Otherwise, you'll catch a cold and get sick. The guest room doesn't have a bathtub, so you can use the bathroom in my room. I will go turn on the hot water." Hearing that she would be bathing in my bathroom, Seraphine blushed bright red and agreed in a very quiet voice. Soon, the sound of running water echoed from the bathroom. Seeing me busy, Seraphine finally gathered her courage and called out, "Valen." I stopped her mid-sentence and said, "You can just call me by my name. You probably want to ask why I haven't asked you for your reason to stay here, right?" Seraphine lifted her head in surprise, looking at me with wide eyes as she nodded in agreement. I told her, "If a beautiful girl like you is knocking on someone's door in such a heavy downpour asking for help, there must surely be a very desperate reason behind it. If you aren't comfortable talking about it, it wouldn't be right for me to keep prying." Hearing my words, Seraphine's eyes welled up with tears. After setting the water temperature, I stood up and slowly walked over to her. I suddenly placed my hand against the wall right beside her ear, trapping her within my space. "I don't care at all about what your intentions might be, but aren't you afraid that if you stay here, I might do something inappropriate to you?" Pressed against the wall, Seraphine bit her lip. She felt a strange warmth rising inside her. Mustering a great deal of courage, she looked directly into my eyes and said, "I trust you." That single answer left absolutely no room for me to test her any further. I remembered that I had some very important tasks to handle tonight, so I smiled and pulled my hand back. "Go on, take your bath. And regarding your clothes, based on your height, my hoodie will fit you just like a dress. Just make do with that for now. Once your clothes are washed in the machine, they will dry very quickly in the dryer." Seraphine let out a massive sigh of relief and whispered, "Thank you." She turned around and walked into the bathroom. Half of that "thank you" was for giving her shelter in my home, and the other half was for understanding and supporting her. Listening to the sound of the running water coming from the bathroom, I stepped out of the bedroom and headed to the kitchen to make some ginger tea for her. A short while later, the bathroom door opened, and Seraphine stepped out wearing my oversized hoodie. The steam from the hot water had turned her cheeks a soft pink, and the fair skin above her knees was glowing. I pointed out, "I've placed the slippers right here for you." Once Seraphine slipped her feet into those warm, furry slippers, a lot of her hesitation faded away. As she walked out of the bedroom, the sweet aroma of honey and ginger tea reached her senses. I walked over to her with a mug in hand. My gaze inadvertently fell on the large neckline of her hoodie, and I froze for a brief second. I held the mug out toward her and said, "Here, drink some ginger tea." Seraphine took the mug and began sipping it in tiny gulps. I asked her, "Should I make some noodles for you?" She replied, "Wouldn't that be a hassle for you?" "What hassle? It's just a few minutes of work. You sit down. I'll fry up 2 eggs for you as well." I was just about to get up when she grabbed my hand. "I know how to fry eggs. Let me help you." Entering the kitchen, Seraphine was completely amazed by my chopping speed. The tomatoes and ham were sliced perfectly on the cutting board. Seraphine climbed onto a small stool, standing on her tiptoes to reach for the egg carton on the top shelf. As she stretched upward, that massive hoodie of hers hiked up just a little bit. The moment my eyes caught sight of that, my face flushed crimson with embarrassment. Perhaps Seraphine noticed my gaze, too. Flustered, she quickly tried to pull the hoodie down, but she lost her balance on the stool. I rushed forward to catch her from behind, but my hand accidentally landed in a place it absolutely shouldn't have. Her body went completely limp, and she fell straight back into my arms. The scent of my cologne mixed seamlessly with the citrus aroma of her body wash. We both stood completely frozen in our spots. That dead silence was finally shattered when droplets of boiling soup began splashing over the pot. I immediately pulled my hands back, took a step away, and shoved a ladle into her hand. "You stir this. I will get the eggs out." As I turned around, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror and noticed that my ears were entirely red. It wasn't that I hadn't been interested in women all these years. It was simply the fact that no one else had ever been able to make me feel this kind of emotion. Seraphine, her face burning red, kept her head bowed as she stirred the noodles. The loud sizzling of the cooking oil managed to mask the sound of our racing hearts quite well. The delicious aroma of the broth filled the entire kitchen. I placed the noodles on the table, deliberately making sure not to brush against her trembling fingers. "Careful, it's very hot. Feel free to turn on whatever channel you want to watch." The moment the television turned on, Seraphine gripped her chopsticks tightly. The screen was playing the exact same adult video that I had forgotten to turn off earlier. The scene was incredibly intense. To hide my overwhelming embarrassment, I let out a light cough, immediately grabbed the remote, went to the menu, and switched the channel to Crayon Shin-chan. I had completely forgotten that in my past life, one of the main reasons I refused to let her inside was out of fear that she might see this very thing. Thankfully, all my years of life experience had given me somewhat of a thick skin. Without changing my expression at all, I reacted as if absolutely nothing had happened. Seraphine also immediately changed the subject. "I had no idea you were such a great cook." Using a tissue paper, I gently wiped away the tiny beads of sweat that had formed on her nose. "You're sweating, right? That means the cold is finally leaving your body. Eat slowly. There is plenty more in the pot." She was eating her noodles with total concentration. She finished the entire bowl, drinking every last drop of the soup, and a beautiful look of pure comfort washed over her face. "Are you full after just one bowl?" I asked. She nodded in agreement. Just as she answered, a loud clap of thunder echoed outside. My eyes instantly darted to the clock. It was 9:57 p.m. There was only half an hour left until the exact time of the murder in my past life. This time, I was absolutely determined to see the true face of that killer. Time was running out. I immediately decided to head to the vicinity of the location where the murder had taken place. I handed her a glass of water and a warm blanket to cover herself. "Since you've eaten, just sit in the living room and watch some TV. I will wash the dishes when I get back. I am going out to grab some snacks. I'll be right back." Seraphine asked in utter disbelief. "You are going out in this heavy downpour?" "It's fine. The store is just nearby." Reaching the front door, I suddenly stopped and turned around. I was terrified that the killer might have premeditated all of this, or worse, that he might have followed Seraphine all the way here. "Remember, until I come back, no matter who rings the doorbell, you must not open the door. I have my keys. I won't ring the bell." Hearing my instructions, Seraphine nodded obediently like a docile cat and wrapped herself snugly in the blanket. As soon as the door closed, she curled up on the sofa in that empty room, quietly waiting for my return. I opened my black umbrella and stepped out into the pouring rain. I checked the time on my waterproof watch. It was 9:58 p.m. According to the forensic report from my past life, the estimated time of Seraphine's death was around 10:30 p.m. Tonight, my target was the 24-hour convenience store located right on the route she was supposed to have taken. In my previous life, Seraphine had bought an umbrella from that exact store, grabbed a bite to eat, and then walked toward the alley where she was ultimately murdered. Even though she was completely safe in my house tonight, I had to confirm if the timeline would try to correct itself. Would someone else die in that spot instead of Seraphine? I could absolutely not let that happen. On the way, I pulled out my phone and checked the security camera at my house. On the screen, Seraphine was sitting on the sofa with her knees pulled up, watching TV. After reassuring myself that she was safe at home and hadn't gone anywhere, I picked up my pace. Just as I approached the convenience store, I heard a faint groaning sound. Crouched near a dumpster at the corner of the alley was a frail, skinny boy. A group of thugs had surrounded him, kicking and punching him while violently demanding to know what he was hiding in his hands. The boy on the ground was clutching a light brown handkerchief tightly, and a metal tin can lay discarded near him. I recognized him in a single glance. It was Cassiel, the quietest boy in my class, the one who was constantly bullied by everyone. Hearing my voice, the thugs turned around, and the color instantly drained from their faces. My parents held a significant amount of power and influence in this city, which meant these street punks were always terrified of me. I didn't even have to lower my umbrella. They fled the scene as if they had just seen a ghost. Now, the only sound echoing in that alleyway was the pitter-patter of raindrops hitting the metal tin. I crouched down and held my umbrella over Cassiel's head. "Are you okay? Should I drop you off at the hospital?" The burn scar from 3 months ago was still clearly visible on his wrist. I reached out a hand to help him up, but he yanked his arm back as if he had just been electrocuted. The metal tin knocked against the wall, spilling a few crayons and a half-empty packet of cat food straight into the mud. "You came out in this massive storm just to feed stray cats?" Cassiel simply gave a faint nod before suddenly breaking into a violent fit of coughing. His fragile shoulders trembled in the freezing rain. I took off my jacket and tossed it to him. "Put this on. Is your mother out of town again? If you fall sick, who is going to take care of your little brother?" Suddenly, the CCTV footage from my previous life flashed through my mind. In my past life, Seraphine had seen something outside the convenience store that had drawn her into that specific alley. Looking at Cassiel, everything instantly made perfect sense. Seraphine must have seen Cassiel getting beaten up by those thugs. All the details from my past life began racing through my head. If Seraphine had stepped out of the convenience store that night to stop this bullying, completely drenched in rain, the thugs' attention would have naturally shifted from Cassiel entirely onto her. I tried to recall what Cassiel looked like on that following Monday in my past life. That day, his injuries had been far more severe than what he had just now. Yet, he hadn't shown any particular reaction to Seraphine's death. This meant that in my previous life, Cassiel must have risked his own life to hold off those thugs so that Seraphine could escape. If those punks hadn't murdered Seraphine, then the real killer had to be someone else entirely. Thinking a bit deeper, I stumbled upon a crucial clue: the killer's weapon. On this stormy night, whoever was wandering around carrying that deadly knife would be the prime suspect. Realizing that those 3 thugs might be carrying knives filled me with intense regret for letting them escape so easily. As for the badly beaten Cassiel, he had survived all the way to graduation in my past life, so I had to leave him here for now. If you are okay, hurry up and go home. I had just turned around when my eyes fell on Cassiel's broken umbrella. I shoved my black umbrella into his hand. "Your umbrella is broken. Take mine. I have some urgent business to take care of, so I can't drop you home. Be careful and get home quickly." Before Cassiel could even refuse, I had already sprinted off into the torrential downpour, disappearing from his sight. The rain was so heavy that those 3 thugs couldn't have run very far. They were hiding under an awning, waiting for the rain to stop. They were loudly cursing my name, plotting how they would throw a sack over my head and beat me up. Yet, they were also terrified because of my family background. While they were busy deliberating, I dashed over and appeared right in front of them. The 3 punks panicked the moment they saw me. Thinking I had come to extort money from them, they waved their hands and began backing away. "Hello, friends. I need to borrow something." The 3 of them exchanged suspicious and defensive glances. Not money. Something else. They stared at me in complete confusion. I looked directly into their eyes and flashed a very innocent smile. "I need to borrow a knife." The 3 thugs stood there absolutely stunned. It was obvious they couldn't comprehend what I was saying. "You guys are street thugs, and you're wandering around without even a single knife on you?" My taunt worked perfectly. The punk with the green hair angrily pulled a butterfly knife out of his pocket and started twirling it in front of me as if he were performing a magic trick. I took just one look and instantly knew that this couldn't possibly be the weapon mentioned in the forensic report, a fruit knife with a perfectly clean cut. "This is way too fancy. I'll give you $100 if you can give me something like a fruit knife." Hearing the mention of that much money, the other 2 thugs immediately started digging through their pockets. One pulled out a multi-purpose Swiss Army knife, and the other produced a gleaming folding hunting knife. Neither of them was the blade I was searching for. "The knives are nice, but I only have $100 on me." "Forget it." Completely ignoring the insults hurled by the thugs, who thought I was just messing with them, I turned around without another word and sprinted back into the freezing rain. Those 3 punks didn't possess the weapon I was looking for. This lead had turned into a dead end. A strange anxiety began to well up in my chest. To be completely honest, The easiest way to solve this case would have been to refuse Seraphine's request to stay at my house and then secretly follow her. That way, I could have caught the killer red-handed. But seeing her alive and well right in front of me in this new life, I simply couldn't control my emotions. I would rather choose the impossible task of finding a needle in a haystack than put her life in even the slightest bit of danger. I went back into the convenience store to buy some snacks. A kind employee handed me a clean towel to dry my hair. I thanked him, wiped off the water, slipped my phone into a waterproof pouch, and stepped back out into that fierce storm. I retraced the exact steps Seraphine had taken in my previous life, heading straight toward that cursed spot where the murder had occurred. The moment I stepped outside, the fierce wind tried to bend the ribs of my umbrella backward. Stepping over mud and shattered glass, I finally arrived at the blind spot of the CCTV cameras. This was the exact location mentioned over and over again in the forensic reports. My waterproof watch glowed in the dark. The time was 10:17 p.m. Suddenly, a violent gust of wind swept past, completely flipping my umbrella inside out. I abandoned the umbrella right there, letting the freezing rain wash over me. The phone in my waterproof pouch vibrated. Leaning against that wet brick wall, I checked the camera feed from my house. Under the dim yellow light, Seraphine was huddled in the corner of the sofa. Her legs were shaking with anxiety, and her eyes remained locked on the front door. The fear on her face was evident, but so was her clear worry for my safety. It was now 10:38 p.m. Suddenly, the sound of clashing metal echoed from the far end of the alley. I went on high alert immediately and crept stealthily in that direction. But what I saw was a very familiar face. It was Draven, the notorious delinquent of our school. Right now, he was sitting under a tin roof, peeling an apple with a fruit knife. Draven was spearing shriveled apples from a plastic bag using the tip of his blade. I knew that his bad boy persona was nothing more than an act. He came from a deeply impoverished family, and his mother suffered from dementia or some other severe illness. His shoes were patched with anti-slip tape commonly used on hospital floors, and his clothes carried the distinct smell of ICU disinfectant. But my entire focus was glued to the fruit knife in his hand. The design and size of that blade perfectly matched the description in Seraphine's murder case file. "What are you doing out in the rain? Hurry up and get over here. My house is just nearby. I'll give you an umbrella." Just as I stepped under the awning, Draven's phone began to ring frantically. On the other end, a nurse spoke in a panicked voice, informing him that his mother's oxygen levels had suddenly plummeted. All color vanished from Draven's face. The knife slipped from his grasp, splashing directly into a puddle. Without muttering a single word, he dashed out into the rain like a madman. I bent down and picked the knife up from the mud. Feeling its cold steel against my skin, I examined it closely. Now, I was absolutely certain. This was the exact time, the exact place, and the size of the knife was a perfect match. This was undeniably the murder weapon that had ended Seraphine's life in my previous timeline. If Draven had accidentally dropped this knife, then the real killer would undoubtedly pass through here in the next half hour and pick it up. I took a deep breath and tossed the knife right back to where it had fallen. Relying on my years of detective experience, I retreated into the shadows to hide and wait. The rain grew even heavier. At 10:35 p.m., a heavily intoxicated man stumbled under the awning. He kicked an empty can lying on the ground, and his mud-caked boot stomped right onto the knife's handle, pushing the blade even deeper into the slush. Still clutching his half-empty bottle, he stumbled away and disappeared into the night. At 10:47 p.m., a delivery boy slammed on the brakes of his bicycle, but he skidded and crashed right over the spot where the knife lay. Cursing loudly, he picked himself up and angrily kicked the knife straight toward the open gutter. The weapon was now completely concealed in the thick mud and filthy water. It was getting late. Finding a knife buried in sludge by sheer coincidence was practically impossible. Only a few minutes remained until the estimated time of Seraphine's death. Suddenly, a figure wearing a black raincoat and a mask entered the alleyway. The person walked with a slight stoop, heading directly for the knife buried in the mud before crouching down. Every muscle in my body tensed instantly. The moment he grasped the handle of the knife, his hand slid out from the sleeve of his raincoat. There, on his wrist, was a very distinct acid burn scar. I immediately stepped out of the shadows, and under the dim streetlights, I clearly saw the face hidden beneath the raincoat. It was none other than Mr. Silas, the chemistry teacher universally regarded as the most decent and honorable man in our school. A massive storm of confusion erupted in my mind. 3 months ago, he had burned his own hand with acid while trying to break up a fight between 2 students in the lab. Even after that horrific accident, he had reasoned with those students with incredible gentleness. He was widely known as a devoted husband who catered to his wife's every need, and he commanded profound respect from absolutely everyone. But if he really was the killer, then all the disconnected pieces of my past life suddenly fit together flawlessly. In my previous life, Seraphine was attacked in this very dark alley, yet there were absolutely no signs of a struggle or any attempt to flee. That was simply because she, too, would have placed her complete trust in this respectable teacher. If Mr. Silas had offered her his raincoat and promised to take her to his home where she would be safe with his wife, Seraphine wouldn't have harbored a shred of suspicion toward him on such a terrifying, stormy night. Realizing all this filled my heart with an excruciating pain. However, I couldn't afford to make any hasty moves. After all, the Mr. Silas standing before me right now hadn't actually committed any crime yet. I decided to utilize my police training to figure out exactly what he was doing outside so late at night. Mr. Silas. Hearing my voice, he snapped his head up. Seeing me completely drenched, a look of genuine surprise and concern washed over his face. Valen, what are you doing out here in this condition? Did you get caught in the rain? Sir, why are you out in the storm so late at night? I asked, scrutinizing his every facial expression. For a fleeting second, I saw a clear hesitation flash in his eyes. Oh, it's nothing. I just came out to grab a pack of cigarettes. He was lying. Mr. Silas never smoked. The entire school knew that fact. My raincoat is quite large. Come, step inside it with me. I will take you to my house. From there, you can wear this raincoat and go back to your home. He was speaking with his usual gentle and caring tone. I just nodded my head and slipped under his raincoat. As we walked together, I noticed his eyes dart toward a nearby condom vending machine before he quickly grabbed my shoulder and hurried me along. I walked beside him like a living corpse. Upon reaching the front door of his house, Mr. Silas suddenly pulled out his phone, typed out a quick message, and then instantly shoved it back into his pocket. I forgot my keys. Wait here for a moment. However, I had clearly felt a heavy bunch of keys dangling from his belt. That was his second lie of the night. My suspicions deepened even further. A few moments later, the door creaked open. It was opened by his wife, Morel, who also taught chemistry at our school. She was wearing a silk nightgown with a loosened belt, and her face was flushed a faint red. Under the dim lights of the entryway, I could clearly see a half-empty bottle of wine resting on the living room table, lit scented candles, and rose petals scattered everywhere. There was a thick, romantic ambiance lingering in the air. In that exact instant, every single light bulb in my head flickered on, and all the scattered clues aligned into one perfectly straight line. Mr. Silas was planning to spend a romantic evening with his wife tonight, but perhaps they had run out of protection, which was why he ventured out into the rain. Following his usual civic-minded habits, he must have stopped to clear the trash clogging the street gutter, and in the process, stumbled upon that knife. Upon seeing me, he must have felt far too embarrassed to purchase anything from the vending machine, and leaving me alone in the storm didn't feel right to him. That was why he brought me home, faked not having his keys, and sent that text message. He was simply giving his wife enough time to change her clothes. Every single piece of his bizarre behavior was now completely explained. I took a towel from Morel and began drying my hair. But now, my suspicion morphed into a massive, burning question. If he truly was such a good man, and his wife was lovingly waiting for his return at home, could a man like that possibly abandon a dying student on the streets, or, worse, brutally murder her? Morel's attention drifted to the filthy knife clutched in Mr. Silas's hand. Found it near the drain. It had a lot of garbage stuck to it. Then I ran into Valen, so I completely forgot to throw it away. Saying this, Mr. Silas was just about to toss the blade into the trash bin when something struck me as very odd. Wait a minute, sir. May I take a look at that knife? Mr. Silas, looking slightly confused, flipped the knife around and very gently handed it to me by the handle. That tiny, considerate gesture proved once again just how deeply gentle of a man he truly was. I examined the fruit knife extremely closely, and my mind was utterly blown. Because it had been so dark outside, I hadn't noticed it earlier, but there was a distinct dent on the blade of the knife. It was obvious that Draven had tried cutting something incredibly hard with it. The forensic report from my past life made absolutely no mention of any such dent. If a murder had been committed with this knife, the resulting wound would have been entirely different. This simply meant that this knife was never the actual murder weapon to begin with. I had been chasing after the completely wrong person all along. Panicking, I checked my watch. It was already 11 p.m. The real killer had probably just stepped outside. In a frantic rush, I shoved the towel back into Morel's hands. Sorry, sir, it's getting very late. I need to get home immediately. I'll be borrowing your raincoat. I shoved the knife back to Mr. Silas, threw on his raincoat, and plunged headfirst back into that terrifying storm. I sprinted back to the exact location where the murder had occurred. I circled the area over and over again. A few random pedestrians walked by, but absolutely no one looked like the kind of person who would stop mid-journey just to murder someone. It was already 11:30 p.m. The streets were completely deserted. I pulled out my phone and checked the security camera at home. Seraphine was curled up on the sofa. She was incredibly sleepy, her head nodding off repeatedly, yet she was still fighting hard to stay awake. She kept looking toward the door, stubbornly waiting for my return. I clenched my fists and tore off my raincoat, tossing it aside. I kept wandering aimlessly through that dense darkness, scouring the area. The clock struck midnight, but I still hadn't spotted a single suspicious person. A profound sense of helplessness and terror settled deep into my core. Had I really missed him? If I couldn't catch the killer today, how would I ever erase the injustice that Seraphine had suffered in my past life? I tilted my head back toward the sky, letting the heavy rain batter my face. My resolve hardened even more. Suddenly, my phone vibrated. I immediately opened the camera app. On the screen, despite being half asleep and battling her intense fear of being alone, Seraphine had walked all the way to the door, anxiously looking around. A sudden noise startled her, and she looked nervously straight at the camera. Smiling warmly into my screen, I silently promised her that I would be home very soon. After that, she dragged her exhausted body back to the sofa and nestled deep into her blanket. Her face now held a deep sense of peace. Staring out at the empty street, I stood perfectly still in the rain, letting the freezing water wash over me. It was an old habit of mine. The freezing water always helped my brain operate at a much faster pace. I started running through the profile of every single person I had encountered tonight. The convenience store worker, Cassiel, those 3 thugs, Mr. Silas. I forcefully shoved every one of them into my suspect list. Cassiel. When the thugs emptied his bag, he hadn't possessed a single penny to his name, let alone a deadly weapon. He was off the list. Those 3 thugs. They might have had a motive, but their knives were entirely different. They were off the list, too. The drunkard and the delivery boy had merely kicked the knife by accident, and besides, that wasn't even the real murder weapon. Once every impossible candidate had been crossed off my list, my mind suddenly locked onto a person I hadn't even considered in my wildest dreams. Draven. Draven had run off toward the hospital upon hearing the news of his mother's deteriorating condition, and his knife had fallen right there. But what if his mother's condition had stabilized quickly? Half an hour was more than enough time to rush back from the hospital. What if, on his way back, he realized he had lost his knife and simply stopped at a nearby store to purchase a brand new one? The police files had indeed recorded that someone had hastily purchased a fruit knife between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m. that night. Furthermore, his estimated return time would match up perfectly with the exact time frame I had been away with Mr. Silas. The moment I pieced all these clues together, my suspicion toward Draven skyrocketed. Testing this theory was incredibly simple. All I had to do was go to Draven's house right now and knock on his door. If he was already back home and had indeed bought a new knife, then his identity as the killer would be confirmed without a shadow of a doubt. Relying purely on my memory, I arrived outside his house. My heart sank. The lights inside his home were switched on. I took a deep breath and knocked heavily on the door. The door swung open. Draven stood there without a shirt, a towel draped over his head. "Hey Valen, what are you doing here? You haven't gone home this late? And whose raincoat is that?" I stepped inside the house, and my eyes instantly locked onto a brand new fruit knife resting squarely on the table. The mysterious individual recorded in the police files who had bought a knife late into the stormy night. It really was Draven. "Mr. Silas gave this to me. Did you just get back?" I asked. "Yeah, man, my mom's condition suddenly worsened. I was in such a huge rush I completely forgot to give you an umbrella. But what are you doing out so late?" "Nothing. I just felt like taking a walk in the rain. By the way, when you ran off, you dropped your knife. Why did you buy a new one?" "Oh shoot! I was wondering why the knife wasn't in my pocket. Where did I drop it?" I replied. "Mr. Silas found it. He threw it in the trash bin." Whatever. I had chopped some tough wood with that knife anyway, so the blade was a little bent. I just bought this new one on my way back. He was laughing incredibly casually, but a deep darkness settled over my heart. His time of return perfectly matched the time of the murder, and he had indeed purchased a brand new knife identical to the murder weapon. It was impossible to cross him off the suspect list now. Carefully calculating my next move, I decided to test him directly. "Draven, we are friends, right? Is that even a question?" "We are absolute brothers. Are you in some kind of trouble? Tell me." Seeing his extremely friendly demeanor, I stared dead straight into his eyes. "I never want to see the day where I have to watch you go to prison for committing a crime. Before you do anything, always think about the consequences. Your mother needs you. Do not ever do anything illegal." Draven was utterly stunned. He misinterpreted my words entirely. He assumed that I had discovered his secret plan to sell counterfeit cigarettes at school. He didn't get angry. Rather, he became incredibly emotional, thinking that I had come all the way to his house in this torrential storm just to set him on the right path. "Don't stress about it, brother. Others might not get me, but you know who I am. I won't do anything like that." I felt like my task was finally accomplished, so I excused myself and left his house. I had no idea that my stern warning had actually caused him to drop his counterfeit cigarette plan forever. As I walked back out into the pouring rain, he thumped his chest from behind me and swore that he would consider me his true brother for the rest of his life. Harboring an incredibly strange mix of emotions, I walked away from Draven's house. I took Mr. Silas's raincoat and quietly placed it outside his front door. I could hear certain noises coming from inside that would make anyone blush, so I decided not to disturb them. Soaked by the heavy rain, I began my walk back home. But now, the heavy burden in my heart felt significantly lighter. If Draven really was the destined killer, then at least right now, he was at a stage in his life where he could still be guided back to the right path and the darkness inside him could be snuffed out. I had met so many people tonight, and for the time being, there was absolutely no suspect greater than Draven. I arrived home after midnight. As soon as the door opened, Seraphine, who was half asleep under the blanket, suddenly opened her eyes. Seeing me return, she immediately smiled with joy and ran toward me. But as she got closer, she saw that I was completely soaked. She asked why I was so wet when I had only gone out to get dinner. She wondered if the wind and rain were too heavy, or if my umbrella broke and the food blew away. She scolded me, saying I wouldn't get anything to eat, and told me to go take a hot shower before I caught a cold. Seeing her worried face, I just smiled. I told her that the guest room bed was nothing but a hardboard with no furniture around it. I suggested she make do in the living room tonight, either sitting on the sofa or adjusting with me. I joked that I would sleep on the sofa, then clarified that she should take the bed while I took the sofa. I asked her to wait while I showered first, mentioning that I didn't want to wet the floor after she had just wiped it, so I would take my wet clothes off right there in the living room. Hearing the rustle of clothing, Seraphine inadvertently looked up. Seeing my tense muscles, her heart began to race. Her face felt incredibly hot, and her throat felt as if it were stuffed with cotton, rendering her speechless. I told her I was going to shower first, and that I would call her into the bedroom to sleep once I was done. I didn't notice her awkward behavior. I simply picked up my wet clothes and went into the bathroom. Seraphine nodded mechanically until she heard the sound of running water from the bathroom. Only then did she collapse onto the sofa as if her bones had been removed, pressing the backs of her hands tightly against her burning cheeks. I don't know how much time passed, but when I stepped out wrapped in a towel, I intended to tell her to go sleep in the bedroom. However, I found her curled up on the sofa like a little kitten, clutching a blanket. She had fallen asleep, and her soft, peaceful breathing echoed in the quiet room. I slowly walked over to her, knelt down, and quietly observed her sleeping face. Watching her rhythmic breathing still gave me an unreal, dreamlike feeling. As I reached out to brush a few strands of hair away from her face, a drop of water from my arm fell onto her slightly parted lips. She subconsciously licked it away, which startled me so much that I immediately tensed my hand. Outside the window, lightning flashed. Seraphine suddenly turned over, kicking off half of her blanket. I instinctively reached out to catch it, but instead, my hand brushed against her warm ankle. I could clearly feel that her breathing, which was calm just moments before, had suddenly quickened. Her eyelashes fluttered rapidly, and her body temperature was slowly rising. She was awake, but she refused to open her eyes. I didn't wake her up. Instead, I scooped her up into my arms along with the blanket and carried her firmly toward the bedroom. In my arms, the girl grew even more nervous. I gently laid her on the bed and stepped back. I pulled out a comforter and covered her with it. Then, I leaned down and whispered in her ear. She subconsciously shrank back from my warm breath. I smiled, turned around, and walked out the door. The moment the door closed, Seraphine opened her eyes in the darkness. Truthfully, during those few steps from the living room to the bedroom, her mind had gone completely blank. She had been incredibly panicked, but she never expected to hear such a sweet goodnight. She pulled the edge of the comforter up to her nose, which still carried the faint scent of my shower gel. For the first time in her life, she didn't sleep curled up in a tight ball. Instead, she stretched out, wrapped herself snugly in the comforter, and fell into a deep sleep. The next morning, the heavy rain that had poured all night finally stopped. Having had a full night's sleep, Seraphine woke up early and put on the clothes that had dried overnight. To fulfill her promise of doing the housework as compensation, she meticulously cleaned my bedroom until it was spotless. But just as she was tiptoeing out of the room, she suddenly froze in her tracks. I had been so exhausted last night that I had fallen asleep right on the sofa. My lower body was wrapped in a bath towel, and I was covered with a blanket. My back was facing her, but the towel that should have been securely wrapped around me had somehow slipped and was lying on the floor. Seraphine's face instantly turned bright red. To distract herself, she skillfully used the ingredients in the fridge to make sandwiches and hot milk. However, the embarrassing scene she had just witnessed kept flashing through her mind. Just as Seraphine placed the breakfast on the table, I woke up on the sofa. Half asleep, I subconsciously reached toward the bedside table to find my pistol, but I only found a cold cup of tea and some glass pieces. I jerked my left hand up and suddenly sat upright. The old injury on my left shoulder from chasing that dreaded criminal, which used to be so painful, didn't sting at all anymore. I rubbed my temples, furrowed my brows, and picked up the towel. The skin right in front of my eyes instantly clashed with my memories. Those knife scars from my battles were gone, replaced by a smooth, youthful body. I was fully awake now. I had truly traveled 10 years back in time. I suddenly turned and looked at the open bedroom door. My heart pounded wildly until I saw her busy in the kitchen. I collapsed back onto the sofa with a heavy heart and let out a long sigh of relief. Thank God this wasn't a dream. She had truly survived that stormy night. In my past life, as a detective, I had endured endless guilt and exhaustion, never enjoying a single day of my youth. Now, my youth was back, and this time, I was determined to live it differently. Seraphine peeked out from the dining room and called out sweetly, telling me to get up and eat. She said she had already made breakfast, though she wasn't sure if I would like it. I sat up and followed the aroma. The tempting scent of wheat and milk filled the air. I told her I was coming. I walked over to the table where Seraphine was quietly waiting for me. I told her she didn't need to wait for me next time and that she could eat first. She replied that it was no problem, that she would wait so we could wash the dishes together. She wanted to see if I liked it, adding that if it needed improvement, she would make it exactly how I wanted it next time. I joked that with her skills, I could open a shop in the alley behind the school. I would be the cashier, and she could be the chef. I mentioned that I used to be quite hardworking when I lived alone, but living with her, I was afraid I would turn into a lazy pig. Seraphine cupped her cheeks in her hands, and her smile grew even wider. I took a bite of the sandwich. The hot fried egg wrapped in cheese slid over my tongue, and it tasted surprisingly amazing. I pulled out a tissue and casually wiped a smudge of oil from her nose. Seraphine's ears instantly turned red. She lowered her head in embarrassment and started stirring the milk in her glass. After finishing breakfast, I was just about to clean the dishes when my hand brushed against hers. Her hands were incredibly soft, but completely freezing. Seraphine insisted on doing all the housework herself and brilliantly cleaned the kitchen. As she stepped out of the spotless kitchen, she looked around again, as if ready to tackle more chores. I grabbed her small hand and firmly sat her down on the sofa. I told her she didn't look well and declared that she was not allowed to work for the next few days. I told her I was the boss, that she had to follow my orders and rest properly, or else I would throw her out. My words scared Seraphine, and she nodded obediently. I then told her to come shopping with me later so I could buy her some new clothes. She said she would go home to get some clean clothes. When I mentioned going home, a clear resistance and hesitation appeared on her face. I told her there was no need, as she hadn't brought any money anyway, and that she would have to stay here full-time as my maid. I threatened that if she didn't pay off her debt, I wouldn't let her leave. Seraphine naturally sensed my underlying intention to keep her with me. A warmth rushed through her, and she finally showed a calm smile, nodding softly. She asked where I usually bought my clothes. She pointed out a second-hand clothing store at the corner of the street behind the school, mentioning it cost $50 for a whole outfit. She added that she carefully disinfected them, boiled them in phenol water 3 times, and then dried them thoroughly in the sun. There was a hint of anxiety in her soft voice, as if she feared I would dislike her. I suddenly remembered a place that sold excellent clothes. I grabbed Seraphine's hand unexpectedly, causing her to stumble half a step. Her forehead bumped gently against my shoulder. She didn't pull away, she just let me lead her. We stopped in front of a glass shop window at the corner. The wooden door of the tailor shop was half open. The sound of a brass bell and a gramophone played sluggishly together. Seraphine looked at the expensive clothes displayed in the window and nervously clutched the cuff of my shirt. She whispered that it looked very expensive. I explained that the shop owner was my mother's old classmate and that she made clothes specifically for students, so it wasn't expensive at all. I pushed the door open, stepping into the scent of ironed cotton fabrics. Aunt Rosalind, who was sitting behind the counter, looked up and noticed our joined hands. She smiled, fine lines crinkling at the corners of her eyes. She commented on what a beautiful girl she was and teased that I had brought my girlfriend to buy clothes. Seraphine's ears turned bright red. I sensed her nervousness and gently let go of her hand. Aunt Rosalind helped her browse through some seasonal clothes and undergarments. She needed a few sets of pure cotton, Class A items. Aunt Rosalind smiled and led Seraphine behind the 11th aisle. The curtain only covered her neck down to her lower body. Seraphine felt as if she were completely exposed to my gaze, and she shrank back behind the shelves in embarrassment. I retreated, sat down by the window, and mindlessly began flipping through a sample book. The hushed voices coming from behind the curtain reached my ears clearly. I heard Aunt Rosalind telling her she didn't need to listen to my preferences, that a woman should dress to please herself, and that since undergarments are worn inside, she should just wear what she likes. Aunt Rosalind confidently added that the set she picked would definitely drive me crazy, noting that I clearly liked her and she liked me, making it a perfect match. Seraphine tried to explain our relationship, but the words wouldn't come out of her mouth. In the end, she just nodded shyly. After selecting the undergarments, Aunt Rosalind grabbed some more clothes and slipped behind the curtain. Hearing the faint rustling of clothes from inside, A thin layer of sweat formed on the back of my neck. I couldn't stop myself from imagining what she would look like in them. Would it be awkward if the curtain was suddenly pulled back? Seraphine held her skirt and turned halfway. The morning light enveloped her in a semi-transparent, honey-colored cotton skirt, which swayed in a beautiful arc like a lily of the valley after a battle. The lump in my throat felt heavy. I suddenly stood up and helped her adjust her shirt collar. She had mistakenly buttoned the second button. My hand accidentally brushed against her neck, and I jerked back as if I had been electrocuted. To hide my awkwardness, I picked up a woven straw hat and placed it on her head. I told her it seemed she was quite satisfied with everything and suggested she try it on again. The curtain lifted once more. The semi-transparent bamboo fiber accentuated the girl's curves in the morning light. I was absolutely mesmerized. Aunt Rosaline really had a discerning eye. Many of the clothes fit her perfectly. Seeing that Aunt Rosaline was getting very carried away, I quickly stopped her. I told her to stop adding clothes because my card was almost maxed out. She scoffed, asking what I was afraid of and telling me to go ask my mother for money. She urged me to spend money on my future wife, assuring me it would make her very happy. She assumed we had already solidified our relationship. I offered a faint smile and nodded repeatedly. While asking her to keep it a secret, Aunt Rosalind jokingly gave me a 90% discount. When I paid, she carefully packed the lingerie separately and whispered in my ear that she had gotten a very good measure of my little girlfriend's figure. I coughed lightly, my ears turning red, and handed over my credit card. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Seraphine standing on her tiptoes by the window, looking at a lacy nightgown. In the morning light, she looked incredibly young and beautiful. In that dazed state, the horrific image of her death in the heavy rain from my past life flashed through my mind again. I clenched my fists tightly and silently swore that as long as I was alive, I would protect this beauty with all my might. After sorting out the clothes, the only thing left was to buy bedding. I picked up the shopping bags and started walking ahead. Seraphine followed slightly behind me at a slower pace, sneaking glances at my shopping bags. The mint green lace hem of her skirt fluttered gently in the breeze. The furniture store was on the 4th floor. I told her she could choose whatever she wanted because she was the one who had to sleep there in the end. At that moment, we looked exactly like a young couple out shopping. She stepped into the bedding store with a mix of nervousness and a strange sweetness. The warm, yellow lighting made everything look incredibly soft. I pushed the shopping cart beside her, watching her lean over to pick things out. It felt exactly as if a newlywed couple were decorating their home. She asked if something was too expensive. I told her it didn't matter, and that if she liked it, she should try it. I pulled down a silk comforter and placed it in her arms. She smiled but didn't say anything. While I was sitting in front of a shelf comparing the cotton filling of the mattresses, she quietly put the 4-figure silk comforter back and picked up a cheap, light green cotton one instead. She said it felt nice to the touch. I asked her what she meant, pointing out that its quality was terrible. I knew she was just scared of the price. I stood up and lightly flicked her forehead. I told her that a good bed could improve her sleep, and since she wouldn't be staying in the guest room forever, we could clean it and leave it for future guests, so buying expensive things was fine. The double meaning of "you won't be staying in the guest room anymore" caught her off guard. I called her over to check the support of a specific mattress. Before she could react, I pulled her onto that soft silk comforter and placed a memory foam pillow behind her head. I gently supported her waist right over her clothes. Nestled in that soft bed, Seraphine blushed slightly. It felt to her as if the air around them was infused with the sweetness of honey. After all the shopping, she stared at the light-colored blankets in the shopping cart and softly whispered, "Thank you, Valen." I stopped abruptly, and she accidentally bumped into my back. I told her that, from today onward, there was no need to say thank you. I told her to talk less and work more, and that before she paid off her debt to me, she was absolutely not allowed to get hurt. Although she was surprised, she nodded like an obedient child. I told her let's go home. After paying, we left our address so the store could deliver the items. I picked up the clothes and started walking her home. As we passed by an old bookstore at the corner, the scent of osmanthus wine drifted through the air. I bought a piping hot rice cake, blew on it, and brought it to Seraphine's lips. She took a bite, and some petals stuck to the corner of her mouth. I casually wiped them away with my thumb. I asked if it was tasty. She let out a soft laugh, saying it was very sweet and fragrant. I promised to take her to the snack street next time, assuring her there were even more delicious things there. Hearing this promise, she stared at my retreating figure as if under a spell. I had no idea that she still remembered that exact same promise I made to her in a park when we were kids. By the time I arrived home after buying all her toiletries, the bedding had already been delivered. I was kneeling on the floor of the guest room, slipping the comforter into its cover. Seraphine stood next to me, holding a new pillow. She offered to do it, joking that she was afraid I might sew myself inside the blanket. I opened the moon-patterned bedsheet and flipped it over her head like a veil. I told her that this whole bed, this entire room, was hers, until she got bored of it. Those straightforward words instantly tugged at her heartstrings. She suddenly turned around. I felt a strange melancholy in the air and noticed that her shoulders were shaking unusually. She was crying. Perhaps for the first time in her life, she was feeling the true warmth of having a home. To lighten the mood, I joked, telling her not to get emotional so quickly. I reminded her that I still had to collect rent from her as usual, and that while she could stay here, she had to figure out how she was going to pay it off. Hearing this, Seraphine wiped her eyes and turned back around. Her eyes were slightly red, but a bright smile blossomed on her face. I had just seated Seraphine on the sofa and was about to heave a sigh of relief when the doorbell suddenly rang. Seraphine was startled and subconsciously took a step back. After going through the horrific tragedy of my past life, my nerves were already strung tight. I couldn't afford to be careless for even a single second. I was terrified that the killer lurking in the darkness might be right outside the door. I jumped up and firmly hid her behind me, saying I would check it out. Seraphine noticed my overly protective demeanor. Although slightly surprised, a sweetness filled her eyes. I looked through the peephole as if facing a deadly enemy. But outside, I saw Draven standing there. I now considered him my prime suspect. In my past life, Draven had never come to my house on this day. The timeline had shifted. This sudden visit instantly heightened my alertness. I controlled my racing heart and opened the door. I asked Draven why he was here, and he replied by asking if he couldn't just drop by to see me for no reason. He mentioned the heavy wind and rain from last night and how badly soaked I was. He said he was worried I might catch a cold, so he brought something specifically for me. He explained that his mother had taught him how to make a warming soup, and he brought it over. Seeing the thermos in his hand, I suddenly realized that my action of going out in the rain to guide him last night had deeply moved him. That was what started this butterfly effect. Looking at this boy full of brotherhood and loyalty standing before me, I was speechless for a moment. My head genuinely started to ache a bit. Draven urged me to drink it while it was hot. He was just about to step inside when he suddenly spotted Seraphine, whom I was hiding behind me. He froze. His eyes immediately darted between the two of us. I asked, "Seraphine, do you know him?" Draven quickly chimed in, saying he understood everything. He addressed her as sister-in-law and joked that he had shown up at the wrong time. He handed over the brown sugar, ginger, and plum soup, telling her to drink it while it was hot, as it would be very beneficial for her too. He then excused himself, saying he needed to go to the hospital to take care of his mother and didn't want to be a third wheel. Draven turned and ran off quickly. Watching his carefree and straightforward retreating figure, a flood of emotions welled up inside me. I found it incredibly hard to believe that someone so loyal and devoted could be that brutal killer. I desperately began to hope that the police would quickly find another, real killer. Clearing the suspicion from her heart, Seraphine looked in the direction Draven had left. She mentioned that everyone said he was the worst bully in school, but he didn't seem like that at all. I told her that you can't judge someone just by their appearance. He had his own story, and many things are not as they seem. I opened the thermos, and a deep aroma of ginger and plum filled the air. I poured out 2 bowls of soup and handed one to her. I told her to drink it while it was hot since she had gotten quite wet last night. I noted that she had been looking quite pale lately and urged her to drink a little more to build up her strength. The spicy and sweet soup instantly warmed me up. She remarked that she had always heard people talking bad about him and never expected him to be such a good person. I replied that it was all a result of life's helplessness. Otherwise, he would never have become like that. Hearing the words, life's helplessness, the color suddenly drained from Seraphine's face. It was clear that these simple words had struck a raw nerve regarding her own painful past. I only knew a little bit about Seraphine's family. In my past life, when I investigated her case, I had looked into her parents, but I didn't find much. Her parents had separated. After her mother remarried, she always lived with her. From this, I concluded that her desperate act of seeking help on that rainy night in my past life was undoubtedly connected to her family. In my previous life, I learned from the neighbors that Seraphine had run away from home into the rain that night because she had a fight with her stepfather, and it seemed like she had even stabbed him. However, during the interrogation, they completely denied it. They claimed that her stepfather had accidentally bumped into the knife her mother was using to peel apples because the floor was slippery. They also mentioned that her stepfather had seen photos of boys on Seraphine's phone and said some things to her, which led to an argument. Shortly after Seraphine left the house, they went to the hospital. The CCTV footage confirmed their arrival time at the hospital, erasing any suspicion of a conspiracy. However, when they found out about Seraphine's death, her stepfather showed no reaction, but her mother fainted on the spot and later lost her mind. What hurt me even more was the investigation revealing that after leaving her mother's house, Seraphine had gone to her father's house. But shortly after, she walked out of there too. In the CCTV footage, her head was bowed, and her mood was even more depressed than when she had arrived. Before coming to my house on that rainy night, her 2 closest relatives had turned her away at their doors. I couldn't even imagine the desperation she must have gone through before knocking on my door. Whenever I thought about it, my regret washed over me like a tidal wave. Thankfully, God had given me a second chance. I would never let go of her hand now. I walked over to the sofa with warm milk. Seraphine was curled up in the corner reading. The warm light highlighted her slender figure. I noticed that she was subconsciously touching a light pink, crescent-shaped birthmark on the inside of her left wrist with her tongue. She tasted it, mixed in some honey, and held the glass in her palm. She was about to thank me, but then she remembered my ban on the phrase and swallowed her words. Amidst the scent of milk, I noticed she was actually looking right at me. I casually placed the glass on the bookshelf. I jokingly asked if she wanted to become a fortune teller. She replied yes, saying that once she learned, she would read my fortune. As we were talking, a loud, piercing sound of a car braking echoed from outside the window. Seraphine suddenly went numb, and the milk almost spilled. I quickly grabbed her trembling hand and ensured everything outside the window was fine. Sitting back down beside her, I gently took her hand in mine. I told her not to be afraid, reminding her that she still owed me a debt, and until it was paid off, no one could take her away from here. Hearing these words, Seraphine, who was still frightened, felt her heart beat even faster. She said that once she learned how to match astrological charts, she would see if we were right for each other, adding that she was afraid she might bring bad luck to her creditor. Hearing this, Seraphine's face instantly turned red. She had secretly matched her birth date and chart with mine, and they matched to an astonishing degree. I asked her what she was thinking about for university. She said she had some ideas but hadn't decided yet. I teased her, saying she was very naive, and that whoever she hugged, I would hug too. I reminded her of her massive debt, joking that if I didn't follow her around all the time and she ran away, I would lose everything. Seraphine looked at me with smiling eyes, slowly stirring her drink in circles with a spoon. A bittersweet feeling swelled in her throat. She mentioned she wanted to apply to Kyoto University or Kyoto Medical School for psychology. Getting admission into those two universities is not easy. I asked why she thought of studying psychology. Suddenly, memories of her mother's madness flashed through my mind. Could it be that her mother already had a mental illness? Seraphine opened her mouth to say something, but ultimately didn't explain. I said it was a good subject, noting it would also help refine her mental fortitude, and promised to study hard so I could tutor her later. She looked at me in surprise. My current grades in class were just average, while she was one of the top students. She asked if I was underestimating her. I said no, accusing her of lying, pointing out that when she lied, she couldn't look people in the eyes and paused while speaking. I knew these words meant she had been secretly watching me. The sweetness in her heart was far greater than the sweetness of that milk. To prove myself, I pulled out 5 years of college entrance exams and 3 years of mock exams, quickly and accurately solving several pages. The truth was, in my past life, I had studied like a madman to get into the police academy and catch the real killer. These questions were ingrained in my soul. Seeing this hidden talent of mine, a gleam of admiration appeared in Seraphine's eyes. I joked that she now owed me an extra tutoring fee that she wouldn't be able to pay off, asking her what we should do and demanding she pay me or write an IOU. I pulled out a pen and paper and handed them to her. I was just joking, but she actually took them and began writing seriously. I wanted to see what she would write. But Seraphine only wrote IUU and Debtor Seraphine on the paper, leaving a large blank space in the middle. Smiling, she handed the paper back to me. She told me that the creditor could fill in the conditions in the middle themselves. I asked if that meant I could do whatever I wanted. She playfully asked what kind of service I needed, calling me her dear creditor. I suddenly leaned close to her ear and let out a warm breath. A light brush of my lips grazed her ear, tickling her. I told her to forget about service. This was an order. Hearing this, Seraphine nervously swallowed. I commanded her to go to sleep before midnight tonight and not wake up before 7 a.m. tomorrow, adding that I would make breakfast. She looked at me in surprise. Then, her heart filled with joy, and with a blooming smile, she said, "Yes, boss." After night fell, following my strict orders, Seraphine quietly went to bed. I gave her a glass of warm milk and closed the door. I told her everything was fine as I left. She looked at the door handle but ultimately didn't lock it. Back in the bedroom, I breathed a sigh of relief. In my past life, to erase my regrets, I had solved cases like a madman. I had even turned down an easy job offered by my senior because I was afraid that sitting idle would make me miss her. Now, 10 years back in the past, she survived, and I was finally free. After comforting myself a bit, I fell into a deep sleep. In my dream, I returned to a corner of that childhood park. A little girl, looking exactly like a porcelain doll, was sobbing. I asked her why she was crying when she was so grown up. She insisted she wasn't crying. I asked if someone had bothered her, offering to make them apologize. The little girl quickly grabbed me and said it had nothing to do with anyone else. Little Valen took out a clean handkerchief given by his mother and gently wiped away her tears. I asked her why she was staring at me like that. She looked at her reflection in the water. Seeing her reflection in that puddle, the little girl laughed through her tears. I said my name was Valen and that I often came there to play, telling her she could come to me whenever she was sad. Hearing his mother's voice, the little boy ran away. The alarm clock rang loudly. I suddenly opened my eyes and muttered to myself, wondering why I was suddenly dreaming about my childhood. At that exact moment, Seraphine also had a dream about the same park. In her dream, she told the boy that one of her parents was leaving her. He told her not to cry, saying he thought it was something major, noting that both his parents had left him and he hadn't even cried. Little Seraphine looked at him in surprise, not expecting this small boy to be so strong. She hugged him tightly, comforting him in return. She asked what he would do if his parents were gone. He said he would live with his grandparents, mentioning he heard adults say they would come back after finishing their work. She said she heard that after her parents left, she would have a new family and they wouldn't want her, expressing how scared she was. The little boy wiped her tears again and held her hand. He told her to come to his house then, saying his house was quite big and that he had heard his parents say they wanted a daughter so they could become a family. The innocent words of a child brought tears to little Seraphine's eyes again. It meant there was still a place for her in this world. However, he never returned after that. He had only left a note full of gratitude. In the final moments of the dream, at the spot where they often met, Seraphine watched his retreating figure, her eyes already brimming with tears. I knocked on the guest room door and woke Seraphine up. On the dining table, I had prepared a blood and energy-boosting red date, red bean, barley, and lily bulb porridge specifically for her. Watching her drink the porridge like a little kitten, afraid of getting burned, I couldn't stop myself from staring at her. She asked why I was looking at her like that. I told her I suddenly realized she reminded me of a little girl I met when I was very young. I mentioned we had played together for less than half a month before she left, adding that I thought she and that girl were very similar. When Seraphine asked if the girl hadn't said goodbye, I got lost in my memories. I explained that she hadn't said goodbye in person. I only found out she left when I saw a torn little note. The note was ruined by the rain, and only half of it remained. Looking at Seraphine, I felt even more strongly that she and that little girl looked exactly alike. I asked her if she had ever met a little boy in a park during her childhood. She smiled mischievously and told me to guess. At that moment, Seraphine's mood clearly brightened significantly. She finally understood why I hadn't shown any reaction when I first heard her name. The note bearing her name had been torn. Knowing that I truly remembered her, she started acting a bit more coy and didn't give me a straight answer. I guessed that it couldn't have been her because she was much more beautiful than that girl. Seeing her face instantly turn red with embarrassment, I smiled proudly. After breakfast, I prepared to take her out to get a cell phone. After all, I couldn't keep her by my side 24 hours a day. At the same time, I was wondering how to ask my distant mother for money for the clothes and expensive bedding I bought last night. My credit card limit was almost maxed out, and I had texted to borrow just $5,000. But contrary to my expectations, my mother directly transferred $50,000. Seeing her message that this wouldn't be enough, along with her advice to focus on your relationship, a faint smile appeared on my face. It seemed Aunt Rosalind had already informed my mother that I took a girl to buy lingerie. Receiving this massive financial support made me feel incredibly relieved. I told Seraphine I was free on Sunday and asked if she wanted to go anywhere. She said she wanted to wander around the park in the old town. Wasn't that the exact place where I had met that little girl? Taking into account her words, her parents' divorce and remarriage, and her habit of avoiding eye contact and stuttering when lying, all the pieces perfectly fell into place at that moment. A sharp shiver suddenly ran through me. In my past life, her death had plunged my world into darkness, and I never had the time to reminisce about my childhood. Looking back now, she was that very same little girl. I mentioned that the park there was great for flying kites and suggested we buy one, fly it, and then head to the food street. She said that sounded great, adding she had never flown a kite before. Seeing her get as excited as a child just over the idea of flying a kite filled my heart with compassion. An ordinary person's daily life was a very rare experience for her. I silently vowed to fill in all the colors missing from her life. I told her I would get her a phone first, joking that if she didn't have one, what would her creditor do if something happened? Hearing this excuse, she smiled and nodded, pushing open the glass door of the phone shop. The shopkeeper enthusiastically removed a dust cover and recommended a pink phone meant for young couples. Hearing this, Seraphine shyly clutched the edge of her light green skirt. I pointed to a smoky pink phone priced at 4,888 yuan. Seeing her staring at the price in shock, I immediately reached out and blocked her line of sight, telling her not to look where she shouldn't. The shopkeeper brought a demo phone and taught us how to take a selfie. My face appeared in the camera, and Seraphine quickly pressed the shutter, but the photo only captured half of her skirt. I leaned in, grabbed her hand, and said selfies look best from this distance. The warmth of my palm seeped through the back of her hand into her skin. I pressed the shutter right next to her temple. The screen lit up. In the photo, she had tilted her head slightly, and my face was pressed against her hair. In the mirror behind us, our intertwined silhouettes were visible. To anyone watching, we looked exactly like a couple sneaking a selfie. After buying the phone, the clerk offered to engrave our initials for free, so I had Valen MM engraved. Seraphine was very confused seeing these letters. The first word was my name, but what did the last 2 letters mean? As we left the store, she was still lost in thought and almost tripped over the threshold. I reached out and gently pulled her into my arms. The scent of her hair filled my nose. I playfully scolded her to watch her step. She urged me to tell her what it meant, saying she wouldn't be able to stop thinking about it. She rarely tugged at my sleeve, and she started acting coy in a very endearing way. I surrendered, saying I was scared of her. I told her I was her creditor, and MM meant my maid. Of course, master could also have another meaning. Seraphine suddenly understood something. Her heart beat faster, and her sweet face turned red again. Seeing Seraphine's blushing face, I laughed internally. Those 2 letters, MM, could also mean, my man. I didn't say that out loud. Her girlish inferiority complex and hopefulness made her look incredibly adorable and emotional in that moment. The bus swayed as it headed toward the old town, the place where our childhood memories were tied. I took out an earphone and gently placed it in her ear. I asked if she had heard the song, Don't Cry, My Dearest, mentioning I liked it a lot. In that moment, a flood of memories flashed through my mind. In my past life, I had listened to this song countless times in the dead of night, mourning her tragic death. Its lyrics, tonight I bloom like a night-blooming jasmine, and wither in my most beautiful moment, perfectly predicted her fate. That magical and melancholic music began playing through the headphones. Listening to the song, tears silently streamed down Seraphine's face. I didn't know if in her past life she had wanted to end her life on a rooftop countless times. The memories of that little boy from her childhood were what had kept her alive until today. These tears were her final farewell to her past and her depressed self. Lost in sorrow, I suddenly felt the touch of a gentle hand. Seraphine's eyes held a heartbreaking tenderness, just like when I was small. She suddenly and very tenderly hugged me tightly. The warmth of the girl merged with the memories of that little girl comforting me in the park. I didn't resist, letting time stand still for that moment. The morning sunlight streamed in through the bus window, washing away the old sadness lingering in our hearts. As soon as we stepped out of the bus, the scent of camphor leaves drifted in the old town air. There were breakfast stalls everywhere and the sounds of bicycle bells. Nothing had changed. Walking to the end of the alley to buy a kite, Seraphine followed me like a curious child. We stopped in front of a kite stall, and her eyes instantly fell on a peach-pink butterfly kite. She asked if we should get one each, saying that blue one would go perfectly with the other. I teased her, asking how I would get the chance to touch her small hands if I flew 2 kites. The stall owner was surprised by my flirting. Seraphine covered her mouth and laughed softly, which largely erased her initial hesitation. The spring breeze brushed her face. I ran ahead with the kite, showing her how to fly it. I picked up my pace and ran faster, and under my guidance, the butterfly kite finally took to the sky. Seraphine looked up at the sky. There was a sparkle in her eyes that she had never seen before. I asked if she wanted to try the amazing feeling I was experiencing and handed her the reel. Suddenly, the wind picked up, and she stumbled. I instinctively wrapped my arms around her from behind. My warm palms covered the backs of her hands. I smelled the scent of jasmine in her hair. She said, Valen, I remember when we were little, you always said clouds were like cotton candy and you wanted to taste them. Now I have found something even better than that. You. Because your smile is just as soft and sweet as cotton candy. As we were exchanging these affectionate words, we suddenly spotted a familiar figure crouching nearby. I asked Draven what he was doing there. Draven froze for a moment. He deflected, laughing and saying it was nothing. While I was waiting, I followed Draven's gaze and saw that he was intensely watching Odette, the girl with a ponytail, who was helping out at her father's barbecue stall. Seeing that girl, I suddenly remembered Draven's tragic story from my past life. In that life, Draven and this girl fell in love. To overcome her father's prejudice due to his notoriety as a school bully, Draven had tried incredibly hard. He cut his hair short, endured immense pain to get his tattoos removed, distanced himself from his bad friends, quit smoking, and even completely cleaned up his appearance. But no matter how much he changed himself, in her father's eyes, he remained a wolf trying to deceive his daughter's feelings. Heartbroken, the girl ran away from home for Draven and started living at his house. Draven's mother, though happy, often advised her to go back and talk to her father. However, the girl's father not only refused to understand but also brought the police to their door. In front of the neighbors, he publicly humiliated Draven for ruining his daughter's reputation and threatened to file a rape case against him. Draven's mother, who was already suffering from severe uremia and other illnesses, was so traumatized by this that she suffered a heart attack and died on the spot. The girl's father was completely stunned. His intention was only to scare Draven, but he never expected it to cost someone their life. A beautiful relationship instantly turned into a blood feud. Draven's mother was his only emotional support. This immense grief and anger forced him to fight back right then and there. Although the girl's father later regretted it and softened, how could Draven betray his conscience and stay with the daughter of the man who took his mother's life? Eventually, they separated. Shortly after, Draven dropped out of school and left the city. Years later, while investigating a case, I found him. He had become a homeless man, barely clothed, sleeping under a bridge. He had lost his mind and just kept repeating one sentence: "There is a killer of his mother, and he wants revenge." This extreme pain had destroyed his ability to think rationally. He forgot how to take revenge and had to spend the rest of his life in madness. The pain in my heart at recalling his foolish state back then was no less than the pain of witnessing Seraphine's tragedy. Therefore, even though the knife in my past life had pointed toward him, I was absolutely certain he was not that kind of ruthless killer. Since God had given me a second chance, I absolutely could not watch this tragedy repeat itself. I planned to give Draven the 100,000 yuan reward I had prepared for the clue about the escaped criminal. With the honorable backing of the police station, the girl's father's prejudice against Draven would definitely decrease significantly. I asked Draven what was wrong. He scratched his head, looking a bit confused, and told me he would explain when we went to school tomorrow. While we were talking, a little boy walked by with his older brother. When he saw me, he froze in place. I said, "Cassiel, bringing your little brother out? What a coincidence. Going shopping?" Cassiel nodded expressionlessly. It seemed he didn't know what expression to show when facing me. His little brother, Kieran, chimed in, saying, "Valen is nice." Kieran was very adorable, and because I had helped his brother, he felt quite close to me. I smiled and patted Kieran's head, telling him he was very nice too, and that he was very obedient. However, Seraphine noticed very astutely that Cassiel's gaze was strange. When I touched Kieran, an uncontrollable impulse and obsession appeared in Cassiel's eyes. He was extremely jealous of his little brother because he was receiving my affection, and he wished he could take his place. This intense emotion made him tremble slightly. Seraphine was frightened by this strange, obsessive look. She couldn't tell if it was deep malice or some kind of unsettling pity. Sensing Seraphine's gaze, Cassiel suddenly turned his head and shot her a piercing look. Seraphine was startled, took a step back, and hid behind me, clutching my sleeve tightly. I looked at Cassiel. He instantly dropped his terrifying demeanor and returned to his lifeless, gloomy self. I couldn't figure out what he was thinking. Cassiel nodded awkwardly, leaning forward slightly, and said, "You guys continue shopping. I'm full. I'm leaving first." I asked in surprise if he was really full, reminding him there was school tomorrow. Hearing this, Cassiel's pupils dilated. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to ask something but ultimately closed it, stating again that he was full and they were leaving. Seraphine looked a bit scared. I quickly led her out of the snack street. As Cassiel's little brother tugged his sleeve, calling out to him, Cassiel tore his gaze away from the corner of the street and gave his family a very rare and tender smile. Seraphine, who was very full, sat on the sofa. I gently rubbed her stomach and sat next to her, taking both her small hands and placing them on her stomach. I explained step by step how to massage her stomach in a clockwise circular motion. Seeing my patient and caring demeanor, Seraphine's face turned red. This warm atmosphere made her feel even more comfortable than in her parents' home. I went into the kitchen and made her a cup of honey, mint, and lemon water. At this moment, sitting on the sofa, Seraphine suddenly sank into a state of anxiety and fear. The prolonged oppression from her family made her fear that the dreamlike beauty in front of her was just a fragile bubble, and she dreaded that when she woke up tomorrow morning, she would have to face that cold, alienating home again. I noticed her strange behavior, walked over, and touched her forehead to check her temperature. After ensuring she didn't have a fever, I sat down next to her and added a little more mint to the honey and lemon water for her digestion. I scooped some tea with a porcelain spoon and gently brought it to her lips. She hesitated to drink it herself at first, but I insisted, feeding her spoon by spoon, promising it wouldn't make her too full. With every sip, that warm, sweet, and sour liquid traveled down her throat to her stomach. Watching my gentle and patient movements, tears welled up in Seraphine's eyes. Her long-suppressed sadness and anxiety were slowly melting away along with this deep sense of security. That night, Seraphine fell into a very deep sleep. In her dream, she saw her deceased grandparents. With tears of joy, she told them she had met a very good boy. At the end of the dream, I held her hand and waved in the air, saying goodbye to her grandparents. As her long-accumulated psychological issues gradually healed, her mental state slowly shifted, and she finally found the peace and comfort she had lost for so long. The next morning, Seraphine woke up early and prepared breakfast. Seeing her so engaged in her work, I noticed she looked different. Her mood had now become much more cheerful and positive. After breakfast, We changed into our school uniforms and headed out for school together. I suggested to Seraphine that we take some time in the next few days to go to her house and fetch her belongings. Hearing the word house, Seraphine visibly shrank back, her fingers suddenly clenching. She didn't know how she would face those two broken families. I held her cold left hand tightly, passing the warmth of my palm to her. I told her not to worry, and that she didn't need to fret about her family's objections, assuring her I had a way to stop them. She squeezed my hand back tightly, her eyes full of pure trust and deep longing, and told me she really didn't want to go back. I promised I wouldn't let her go back, reminding her she was in my debt and couldn't run away until she paid it off. Seraphine smiled and nodded. Having seen the brightest light in her life, she finally had the courage to completely step out of that darkness. The next day, Seraphine and I went to school together. The classroom echoed with the sounds of students reading aloud. As soon as we sat down, our deskmate Fiora approached us with a gossipy attitude. She excitedly mentioned hearing that we went to the night market together yesterday, and that it was very cute, asking if it was true. Seraphine blushed furiously. I reached out and pinched Fiora's cheek, demanding she tell the truth about who told her. While saying ouch, 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 she confessed that it was Cassiel's little brother, Kieran, who said I was on a date with a beautiful girl. I reluctantly let go of her cheek. Some boys in the class joined in the teasing after hearing the gossip. I glared at them, and they all quieted down and resumed their morning reading. Just then, a still attractive middle-aged woman suddenly appeared at the classroom door. I looked at her and realized it was Evelis, Seraphine's biological mother. Seeing her, Seraphine's body stiffened, and she subconsciously looked to me for help. The homeroom teacher went to the door, exchanged a few words, and then looked back into the classroom, telling Seraphine her mother was looking for her. Catching my signal, Seraphine took a deep breath, stood up, and walked toward the classroom door. As soon as she stepped out, her mother made an apologetic gesture and said a few words to Mr. Thorne. The teacher understandingly stepped away. I sat in my seat in the classroom, my gaze drifting out the window. Not far from the door stood Seraphine, her eyes lowered and lips pressed tightly together, letting her mother talk incessantly. After a while, her mother said something, seemingly in a cold tone, and then turned and left. Seraphine, who had shown a bit of anger that morning because of my promise, sank visibly into disappointment upon returning to her seat. She looked at me with slight anxiety. I didn't ask any questions. I just gave her a firm and meaningful smile. Seeing my smile, her tense shoulders relaxed slightly, and her facial expression slowly calmed down. Fiora asked Seraphine what her mother wanted to talk to her about. She said it was nothing much, just some family matters. I spanked her head, adding that children shouldn't get involved in adults' affairs. I told Seraphine that after morning study, I would take her to the convenience store for something good to eat, and told her to read her book like a good girl now. I used this opportunity to help Seraphine out of that awkward situation, but in my heart, I had already planned my next move. Since the shadow of her real family was still looming, I had to gain more leverage to stay with her openly and honestly. Just as the morning study was about to end, I walked straight to the podium and made a request to Mrs. Thorne. She told me that, at this age, I should still focus on my studies. I challenged the teacher to a bet. If I ranked in the top 10 of the class in this week's final exam, she had to allow me to change my seat and sit next to Seraphine. Hearing top 10 of the class, Mrs. Thorne's calm eyes instantly lit up. She wasn't old-fashioned. If I could channel teenage confusion into motivation to work hard, that was actually a plus point for her. She praised my courage and agreed, stating that as long as I made the top 10, she would grant my request. I smiled and made a pinky promise with her. Returning to my seat, I immediately opened my English book and started reading. My deskmate Harry stared at me as if I were a monster and exclaimed, wondering how I suddenly became such a nerd. I ignored him because I knew this was a game I absolutely had to win. As soon as morning study ended, I kept my promise and took Seraphine and Fiora to the convenience store. Fiora picked out 10 yuan worth of snacks, trying to get revenge for me pinching her cheek that morning. Seeing that Seraphine was still not in a good mood, I pulled a lollipop from the shelf and handed it to her. I figured eating something sweet would replenish her sugar levels and make her feel better. I reminded her of what I said that morning, that after school, I would handle everything. Seraphine took the lollipop, took a few deep breaths, and finally gave me a brilliant smile that was no longer a facade. As I stepped out of the store, I saw Draven sitting casually on a flower bed, intensely watching Odette, the ponytail girl who was helping out at the nearby barbecue. He was so absorbed in watching her that he didn't even notice our approach. I told him that if he kept staring like that, sooner or later, someone would mistake him for a stray stalker. Draven snapped out of his thoughts, saw us, and stuttered, referring to Seraphine as my future wife. This made Seraphine's face turn red. I told Seraphine and Fiora to head back to the classroom first. Then, I turned and sat next to Draven, telling him that since I had caught him red-handed, I had some advice for him. I told him that when it comes to pursuing girls, he should just remember one word: dedication. But I added that my concern wasn't that Odette would reject him, but rather that her highly traditional father would definitely look down on him, seeing him dressed like a school thug. Draven's face instantly fell. In his past life, it was exactly this stubborn prejudice that forced his mother to bow down, leading to the heart attack that killed her and ultimately driving Draven to madness. In this life, I absolutely could not watch this tragedy repeat itself. I told him I had a way to change her father's opinion of him. I mentioned I knew a clue about a fugitive criminal with a 100,000 yuan reward and advised him to go to the police station to report it. I explained that once the police caught the guy, it would be a massive achievement for him. With the backing of the police and praise from the school, if Odette's father still threw a fit about his appearance, he could just say he infiltrated the gang to help solve the case. I assured him her father would definitely see him in a new light. Draven exclaimed that it was a great move, suggesting we split the 100,000 yuan reward. I told him he would get 50,000, which would ease the pressure of his mother's medical treatments and give him more time to pursue girls. I confirmed the information was rock solid and asked if he was in. He declared he would always hold me in his heart like a brother and said he didn't need to say anything more. I had just finalized the plan with Draven when I noticed Odette gathering her courage and walking toward us. I tactfully moved to a corner and secretly watched the 1.8-meter tall Draven. Facing Odette, he was genuinely so nervous, exactly like a schoolboy who had made a mistake, that he even started stuttering. I later found out that Odette had called the police to get him out of trouble. She had thought the school's notorious bully would be a very cruel and terrifying person, but she never expected him to turn out to be a pure-hearted, stuttering boy. Seeing Draven follow the girl, I finally felt a sense of fatherly relief. I turned and saw Cassiel standing quietly a short distance away. I apologized for last Friday night and asked if he was okay. He said he was fine. He handed me my handkerchief, saying he had cleaned it properly and brought it to return it to me. I took back the clean handkerchief, patted his shoulder, and told him he could come to me if he ever needed anything. I turned and walked back into the classroom. As soon as I entered, I snatched the chocolate Fiora had secretly hidden in her drawer. Amidst Fiora's protests, I handed the last piece to Seraphine. Seraphine gently broke the chocolate in half, giving half to Fiora, and the entire classroom filled with youthful energy. Sitting back in my seat, I pulled out my phone and received a fax from my mother, an employment contract for a nanny. The terms of the contract were very clear: a monthly salary of 6,000 yuan, free room and board, and a promise not to engage in any work detrimental to physical or mental health. Looking at the contract, I let out a long sigh of relief. This wasn't just an employment document, it was a legal shield I had prepared specifically for Seraphine. Once she signed this contract, proving she was over 18 and had enough income to live independently, her parents' guardianship would no longer be able to interfere with or abuse her rights. Since those two families couldn't give her love and warmth, I would personally use legal methods to pull her out of that dark swamp. After ensuring the contract was perfect, I sent the detailed information about the fugitive criminal to Draven. Looking at the bright sunshine outside the window, I knew that my new life with Seraphine was finally truly about to begin. After school, as soon as we reached the school gate, Seraphine's body suddenly stiffened, and she took a step sideways, instinctively hiding behind me. I followed her gaze and saw her biological father, Alaric, standing there. I guessed that since Seraphine hadn't been home for 2 days and her mother couldn't find her at school that morning, she must have gone to look for her father. I told Seraphine that if she wanted to talk to him, she should tell me, and if she didn't want to, I would handle it, urging her not to worry about anything. Seraphine's pale cheeks looked like soft, crushed rice paper in the spring breeze. She took 2 deep breaths, slowly relaxed her tense body, and stepped forward with me. We deliberately ignored Alaric and walked straight out of the school gates. We hadn't gone far when we heard footsteps behind us. "Seraphine, wait a minute," Alaric demanded. He said her mother told him she hadn't been home for 2 or 3 days and asked what had happened. Seraphine's eyes, however, secretly glanced at me. She pursed her lips, trembling, unable to get a single word out of her mouth. Without any hesitation, right in front of her father, I held her cold hand tightly. This sight stunned Alaric. Seraphine also looked at him in surprise, her eyes full of fear. She was afraid her father would harm her over this. I retorted, asking him what happened, stating he should know very well what happened. I pointed out that on Friday night, in that heavy rain, she didn't even have a roof over her head, and asked him what he thought had happened. He demanded to know who I was, telling me to let go of her hand and stay away from Seraphine. I criticized his family's terrible temper, saying they would rather watch their own daughter get soaked than let her stay the night, and asked where her home was now. I stated I had no intention of showing any mercy to such a selfish, heartless, and hypocritical person. "You bastard, who do you think you are giving me a lecture?" Alaric shouted. He said I had no business interfering in his family matters and demanded I let go of her hand immediately, otherwise he would call my teachers and parents. I calmly agreed, saying I would call my parents right now, adding that I didn't mind if he wanted to get scolded by them too. He accused me of harassing a girl and threatened to call the police if I didn't let her go. I informed him that filing a false police report is a crime that could get him detained, and that government institutions were not his personal bodyguards, telling him to calm down. Alaric tried to argue but couldn't come up with a solid response. He reached out to forcefully pull Seraphine away. My eyes turned cold, and I grabbed his wrist. The grappling skills I had honed in the police force during my past life made my strength far greater than that of an ordinary high school student. Alaric groaned in pain. I told him I was going to tell him 3 things and that he should listen carefully. First, Seraphine's custody belonged to her mother. He had no right to forcefully control or touch her, and I demanded he remove his hand. Second, when she needed protection the most, he watched her being forced into the rainstorm, so what right did he have to stand there acting like a hypocrite today? Third, she was an adult and capable of being independent. She didn't need his favors. I concluded by saying we were going to have lunch and bid him goodbye. Shaking off his hand, I warned him that if he dared to bother me again, I would go to his company and put up a banner so his colleagues and superiors could hear how he threw his own daughter out of the house in the heavy rain. I suggested that would definitely affect his promotion. I had hit the weakest nerve of his selfish nature perfectly. Alaric went blank. He had no words to say. On the way back home, Seraphine kept looking at me. I seemed both familiar and like a stranger to her, because I exuded a maturity that a high school student simply shouldn't possess. I apologized to Seraphine, saying I had lost control of my emotions and insulted her father without considering her feelings. I suddenly felt a bit of regret. After all, he was her biological father, and my confronting him like that might have put her in a difficult position. She said she was very happy, truly very happy, gently squeezing my hand. Her fingers subconsciously traced a design on the back of my hand. She lowered her eyes and said, "The way you stood in front of me, the way you spoke up for me without hesitation. You were just a high school student, yet you had the courage to face my father head on. I am very happy." She looked up, and I saw her eyes were already welling with tears. I pulled out a handkerchief and gently wiped her slightly red eyes, asking why she was crying when she was happy. She didn't say anything, just gave me a very sweet smile. Those tears contained total freedom from the past and the joy of a new life. I called her a silly girl for crying and laughing at the same time, but added there was nothing wrong with crying. Being able to laugh after crying was the best thing. Hearing my gentle words, Seraphine felt as if a massive block of ice on her heart had finally melted. Back home, I scooped 2 bowls of rice from the rice cooker. She protested, saying it was too much taro and pork rib rice and that she couldn't eat it all. I told her there's a kind of hunger called "your boss thinks you're hungry," and told her to eat quietly. I added that even if she weighed 200 pounds, I would still let her stay here. I joked that if she really got fat, I would become her strict coach and help her lose weight. I told her not to punish herself for her figure, saying girls look cute when they are a bit chubby, just like Fiora, whose cheeks are very fun to pinch. She replied that if she got chubby, it would mean I'd pinch her cheeks and bother her every day, which she wouldn't be able to tolerate. She reminded me she was my employee now, and if I bothered her, it would be workplace bullying, threatening to complain to the labor bureau. I joked back that I couldn't even pay the compensation and that I didn't even have a contract, asking what she would sue me over. I then said, "Who said I don't?" I put down my chopsticks, walked over to the fax machine, and handed her a document, saying, "An agreement. I have already prepared it for you. Sign it after you finish eating." Seraphine looked at the name on the contract with slight surprise. I asked if she had told her mother that this matter was only legal if she signed it, wondering if she had said anything else. She read aloud the condition that if she didn't take good care of me, I would fire her, specifically the clause about taking care of daily needs, like warming the bed if it gets cold at night. She declared it was clearly an unfair contract, noting that such special services required extra pay. Seeing that she was no longer awkward and shy like before, and was even joking with me, I couldn't stop myself from laughing. This contract of freedom had finally brought her entirely under the protection of my wings. The atmosphere around the dining table was very warm and comforting. Seraphine flipped through the papers on the table. Initially, she thought it was just a joke, but she was surprised to see the detailed and formal terms within. She asked if I was seriously planning to pay her according to this, noting it was in black and white and that once signed, it would be legally binding. She warned that if I didn't pay her and she sued me, I would have to pay multiple times in damages, saying it wasn't fair and maybe we shouldn't write this contract. Looking at her panicked face, I took a slow sip of milk. I already had a plan in mind. I explained that this contract wasn't just a game between us. Its real purpose was to deal with any future difficulties from her parents. Hearing the word parents, I very closely noticed her shoulders barely tremble and her eyes filled with confusion. She asked what this contract had to do with her parents. I explained that although she had just become an adult, as long as she didn't have a stable income, she was still completely under their control. However, I noted that according to Article 18 of the Civil Code, as long as she had a stable income to support herself, she would be considered fully entitled to civil rights. I quickly swiped the screen of my phone, pulled up the relevant legal regulations, and handed it to her. I put it simply. As long as she had this job, she had the right to refuse any kind of pressure and interference from her parents. If they pressured her, she could use the law to protect herself. She asked if it was true. No one could have guessed to what extent this kind of bloodless domestic violence had pushed her into despair. Now, looking at the legal regulations, I finally saw the sadness in her eyes completely fade away, replaced by a new hope that had never been seen before. I asked her if she understood the benefits now, telling her she would quietly sign these papers after dinner. She argued that $6,000 a month was truly too much, mentioning her mother only earned $3,000 and that she couldn't even do a nanny's job properly. She suggested cutting it in half. I called her a silly girl, pointing out she ate my food and lived in my house, so in the end, I would get this money back from her anyway. I told her the number was just for show, and that ultimately, it was all mine. "Wow, then I'm relieved," she said, instantly relaxing. As she relaxed, I scooped some pork rib rice into my bowl, making every single grain of rice taste incredibly sweet to me. I couldn't resist teasing her again, saying I would make sure she got every single penny, but if she thought it was too much, all household expenses would be deducted from her salary. I joked that I also wanted to see what it was like to live off someone else's scraps. She agreed, promising to cover Valen's expenses for the rest of her life from her salary, including food and drinks, and even said she would record a video as proof. After dinner, in a very good mood, she signed the contract. She even playfully kicked me out of the kitchen while humming happily. She put on gloves and joyfully started washing the dishes. Peace settled over the living room again. I suddenly remembered the herb I had brought from my grandparents' house the night before. The elders said placing it under the pillow would help her sleep better. I was so busy yesterday that I forgot. I went into the guest room. The bed was neatly made, and there was a faint fragrance in the air. I walked straight to the window and casually lifted the pillow. My gaze instantly froze. Under the pillow lay a cold fruit knife, resting quietly. My eyes widened in shock. This knife almost perfectly matched the murder weapon described in the forensic report from my past life. This knife was definitely not mine. Ever since she arrived here, completely soaked and homeless, this knife had always been with her. Countless images from my past life rapidly flashed through my mind. Suicide was out of the question because the angle of the wound was completely wrong. But if the murder weapon was truly hers, then all those people I had crossed off my list because they didn't have a weapon, the beaten thugs, the homeless people passing by, the delivery boy, even anyone who walked past me. Since she had the murder weapon, anyone passing through that area that night could have snatched the knife and committed the murder. All my theories up to this point were completely turned upside down in an instant. This meant that the knife, she had always had it. She had finished washing the dishes and was now standing at the door. Seeing me standing numbly, holding the pillow, and then looking at the exposed fruit knife on the bed, her eyes filled with immense terror. She was afraid I would misunderstand. I told her it was okay, and that she didn't need to explain. I said it was a good thing for a girl to be so aware of her safety when she was alone. I hugged her tightly. Feeling her stiffness and helplessness, my deep eyes processed the information of that tangled case from my past life like a madman. In this life, I swore I wouldn't let this tragedy repeat itself. Whether bringing her in, letting her stay here, or finding the knife hidden under her pillow, I didn't care. My way of tolerating and trusting her made Seraphine feel as if something was caught in her throat. She wanted to thank me 1,000 times, but not a single word could come out of her mouth. Something her grandmother had told her began echoing in Seraphine's ears. If you meet the right person in your life, you will definitely find happiness. As a child, she didn't understand why her parents always fought. This was her grandmother's answer. Now, she finally understood. Although many people struggle their whole lives to find this happiness, she considered herself very lucky to have met me. She took a few deep breaths to calm herself. She slowly walked to the bed and quietly placed that fruit knife, which had once given her a false sense of security, into the drawer. She no longer needed that cold object. Back in the living room, I was taking 2 cups of yogurt out of the fridge. Smiling, I peeled the lid off one and brought the frothy lid to her lips. I told her drinking yogurt after a meal was good for health and told her to lick it so as not to waste it. Seraphine just stared at the lid held so close to her face. I was smiling in that warm yellow light. She took the lid in her hand, her ears burning. Like an obedient child, she parted her lips slightly and brought them close to the plastic lid. As her tongue licked the yogurt, that sweet and sour taste spread across her tongue. Watching her lick the yogurt like a cute little cat, I was mesmerized for a moment. I told her I was afraid she wouldn't like the original flavor, so I opened the sweet one for her, asking how it was as I opened my own bottle and drank it in one breath. She noticed the yogurt on my lips, quickly grabbed a tissue paper, and gently wiped it away. Only after doing this did she suddenly realize the slightly romantic atmosphere between us. She quickly backed away, shyly sitting back down on the sofa, holding the bottle with both hands, and drinking slowly. Although she was drinking her yogurt very decently, I knew her entire focus was on me. I was watching her with great interest. My eyes drifted to her slightly trembling knees, which were drawn upward. Her hands were clasped tightly, making her face red. Her bare heels subconsciously rubbed against each other. I noticed her nervousness and found it incredibly endearing. So, I smiled and sat next to her. I asked, "Madam, may I borrow your shoulder to sleep for a while? My stomach is full, and lying down doesn't feel good. It would be nice to sleep leaning on someone." Seraphine shyly agreed. When I gently leaned close to her, the tips of my hair brushed her collarbone, and she instantly went numb, as if her blood had frozen. My breath brushed against her neck, and she just held her breath, trying to match my rhythm. Those 5 minutes felt both very short and extremely long to her. The wind blowing outside the window tousled her hair. A few strands fell onto my forehead, causing me to frown slightly. She playfully reached out and twirled the hair on my forehead around her fingers. Then I shifted slightly. My forehead nuzzled into her cheek, and half my head rested on her chest. Suddenly, I caught a very strange fragrance. I jerked awake, realized my position, and quickly sat up straight. I had actually fallen asleep. I apologized profusely, assuring her I had no intention of taking advantage of her. She replied that I always said she wasn't well, but she thought my condition was the same, because if I could fall asleep leaning on her so quickly, I should sleep a little longer. Feeling the comforting touch of her hand on my cheek, I smiled and said nothing. I peacefully closed my eyes and went to sleep. In my past life, being a detective, I was always very alert, so my sleep had always been very light. This was the first time I had been able to fall asleep so quickly and peacefully near someone. Gradually, she also fell asleep leaning on me in that breeze. While sleeping, I didn't even realize when I slid down and my head ended up in her lap. Lying on her soft thighs, I turned slightly and was sleeping, holding her slender waist tightly like a pillow. Seraphine slowly woke up and saw all this. Her face instantly turned red, but she didn't stop me. Instead, she gently placed her hands on my back, watching me hug her like a little puppy. She was completely lost in this feeling. Just then, the alarm clock rang loudly, startling me awake. When I woke up, I found myself hugging something soft. My head was still in her lap. I was so shocked that I jumped up from the sofa. I exclaimed, "Careful! Since when did my sleeping habits become so bad?" I scratched my head, looking quite confused, and quickly ran to the bathroom to wash my face. When I came out, I saw her looking at me and smiling. She didn't care at all about my mistake. I breathed a sigh of relief. Truthfully, I was afraid that getting excessively close like that would upset her and make her feel wronged. Now that I was absolutely certain there was plenty of room for me in her heart, I immediately made a decision. I said, "Let's go to your house and get your things." The setting sun cast a melancholy orange hue over Seraphine's old-style apartment building as evening approached. The closer we got to her door, the heavier Seraphine's steps became. In that deathly silent stairwell, her heartbeats echoed loudly. Many people came and went, their eyes repeatedly darting to our faces. "Oh, our Seraphine's boyfriend is quite handsome," teased Mrs. Van as she came down the stairs, a woman who always had a habit of snooping into others' privacy. Seraphine blushed furiously. She didn't answer, just lowered her head further. I ignored those remarks and led her straight to the 4th floor. At that moment, I didn't even realize that she hadn't shown me the way, yet I stopped exactly in front of her apartment door. Arriving in front of apartment 402, Seraphine took out her key. Her hands were trembling so much that she couldn't even find the keyhole. I could guess how heavy the sound of the lock clicking open would be for her. Her mind was completely blank. She had absolutely no idea what awaited her behind that door. Seeing her standing there numbly and hesitating to open the door, I stepped forward and turned the handle for her. As soon as the door opened, silence filled the house. Seraphine breathed a sigh of relief. Not facing her mother directly calmed her tense nerves a bit. Just when we thought no one was home, a bedroom door suddenly opened, and a boy of about 7 walked out. It was her half-brother, Leo. "Sister, where have you been for so many days?" he asked. "At a friend's house," she replied. She asked where Leo's parents were. Even though her parents weren't good to her, she always considered her little brother family. But whenever she saw him, she remembered her parents' love for him and their neglect of her, leaving her emotions incredibly tangled. "Mom and Dad are at the hospital. Mom will be back soon to cook," he said. He then asked, "Is this handsome brother your boyfriend, sister?" Hearing this from her brother's mouth, Seraphine's cheeks turned red. She subconsciously looked at me. Seeing no reaction from me, she didn't offer an explanation. But hearing that her mother would be back soon made her panic, and she quickly decided to pack her things. Hearing the word hospital, the bloody truth of that stormy night, which had been deliberately hidden, resurfaced in both my and Seraphine's memories. Last Friday night, her mother had forcefully checked Seraphine's phone and saw the pictures Seraphine had secretly taken of me. Because of her ex-husband Alaric's betrayal, her mother's mental state was already very fragile. Those photos struck her deepest nerve. In that moment, she unleashed all her hatred for her ex-husband onto Seraphine, insulting her with vile words and calling her shameless. Before Seraphine's helpless and sorrowful eyes, her completely unhinged mother grabbed a fruit knife from the table and screamed that she would slash her daughter's face. Seeing this, her stepfather, Evander, rushed forward like a madman to snatch the knife. In the struggle, the knife turned, and her stumbling mother plunged it deep into Evander's stomach. The smell of blood snapped her mother back to reality, and she collapsed onto the blood-stained floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Evander's selfless act to save her from the knife wasn't to save Seraphine, but to prevent his beloved wife from becoming a murderer. He had secretly loved her since childhood, a love that was incredibly obsessive. Despite his wife's madness, he was willing to give her his all, but he had absolutely no love for that innocent girl. Seeing her husband covered in blood, her mother turned, glared at Seraphine with terrifying eyes, and screamed, "You jinx! Get out of here! Go as far as you can, without a single penny!" Seraphine was thrown out of the house into that terrifying, heavy rain. Seraphine shook her head, forcing those cruel memories out of her mind. Seraphine told her little brother to go back to his room and do his homework, then pulled me into her bedroom. She pulled out a pink suitcase and frantically started stuffing clothes into it. I looked around the room, and my eyes fell on a small diary with a lock resting in her drawer. In my past life, I had opened this diary after her death. It meticulously recorded the moments of happiness she had forced herself to save in order to gather the courage to live. In this life, I didn't even touch it. Although Seraphine hadn't told me what to bring, based on my feelings for her, she realized I had quietly taken out her most favorite books and diaries and neatly placed them on the table. Seraphine waited until she finished packing. When she turned around, she saw that everything I had selected was exactly what she wanted to take with her, and she had left everything else behind. She stood there numbly, a strange feeling welling up in her eyes. So, while she was secretly watching me, I was paying just as close attention to her. After packing all her belongings, Seraphine took out a piece of paper and left a small note. We grabbed the suitcase and walked out of the room. Seraphine placed the note on the dining table and had just turned toward the door when suddenly, the lock clicked and the front door swung open. Her mother stood in the doorway, and the air in the room instantly froze. The hand Seraphine used to hold the suitcase began to tremble violently. Her mother froze in place. Just then, Leo heard the noise, opened the door, and yelled, "Mom, I'm hungry!" This voice shattered the deathly silence. Her mother swallowed her anger and lovingly sent her son back to his room. As soon as the bedroom door closed, her expression turned icy cold. She glared at Seraphine with terrifying eyes. "What is the meaning of all this? You've grown up, you've sprouted wings, and now I can't control you. You found another man and are planning to run away with him, aren't you?" Seraphine bit her lip and remained silent. Those words from last Friday, "Go as far as you can," were still ringing in her ears. "Do you know how hard it was for me to carry you in my belly for 10 months and give birth to you? And you're just turning your back and leaving? Did you even ask me once? Do you have even a shred of respect for me?" Tears filled Seraphine's eyes. She wasn't crying because she was being scolded, but because she was heartbroken. That last bit of tenderness in her heart for her mother was completely shattered in that instant. To preserve what little dignity she had left, she didn't want to argue publicly with her mother. Seeing her weeping silently and helplessly like this, I stepped forward with a flushed face and firmly blocked her mother's path. "Auntie, Seraphine didn't choose this path on purpose. You and Uncle pushed her into this swamp yourselves. I have already spoken to your teacher. You don't need to sweet-talk me or smile in front of me. I know what kind of rich people you are," she spat, turning to Seraphine, her face full of sorrow. "Just because he looks handsome and rich, he is exactly like your father. When he likes you, he'll sweet-talk you. When he doesn't, he'll kick you out. Can't you see what happened to me? He will betray you and leave you one day too. You can still wake up. It's not too late." Hearing these terrifying words, Seraphine looked at me with tear-filled eyes. She absolutely did not believe I was that kind of person, especially since we hadn't even officially started dating yet. I took a deep breath and gently wiped Seraphine's tears with my sleeve. I didn't pay attention to empty promises like, "I will love you for 10,000 years. I just knew that love meant cherishing today. Auntie, no one can guarantee the future. But I know one thing. All Seraphine has gotten from me are happy memories, and that is enough. No matter how much you sweet-talk, I strictly warn you to stay away from my daughter. I also strictly warn you that Seraphine is now an adult and she has a stable job and income. Legally, she has every right to get away from your forced control. If you take advantage of being a mother to harm her, I will stand firmly against you. But if you just want to keep her with you so she remains your puppet, I'm sorry, I will absolutely not let that happen." Her mother picked up the contract with trembling hands. As soon as she saw the words "monthly salary of 6,000, her eyes widened in shock. She suddenly realized how much stubborn rebellion was hidden within her daughter's frail body. "Fine, fine. So what if you are rich? Don't teach me the law. If you dare take her away, I will bring the police to your house too. We are not weak, I countered. But have you thought about the consequences of this spectacle? Leo is still young. You surely wouldn't want him to face people's ugly words and loneliness at school because of your actions, would you? My words struck a raw nerve. She cared about Leo. I cannot ruin my husband and son's lives because of me. Fine. Get out of here. Remember, when this rich brat leaves you, don't come crying back to me. You think you're going to a golden cage. You'll regret it very soon. I bent down, picked up the largest piece of a broken porcelain cup, and pressed its sharp edge hard into my palm until it left a red mark. You are wrong. I am not building a cage for her. I will treat her like royalty, but I will also teach her how to spread her wings and fly in her own world. My words shook Seraphine to her core. There were still tears on her eyelashes when she suddenly grabbed my wrist and walked out the door with me. You are all ungrateful wretches! Go! All of you go! Get lost! Seeing her mother looking so old and tired in an instant brought tears to Seraphine's eyes, but she forced them back and said, Goodbye, Mom! Everything I wanted to say, I've written on the note on the dining table. She quickly grabbed her suitcase and hurried out of the room. She was afraid that if she stayed even a second longer, she might not be able to decide to leave, so she started walking down the stairs, where the motion sensor lights turned on one by one. Suddenly, a heavy sound came from above, ching-ching. This noise startled a bird perched on the window, and it flew away. Seraphine trembled violently. The wheels of her suitcase got stuck on the stairs. I could clearly feel her fingers turn ice-cold and numb in an instant. Along with the sound of rapid footsteps, her mother stumbled down the stairs very quickly, even hitting her head against the wall, which started to bleed. Ching-ching, don't go. It's your mother's fault. It's my fault. I will never scold you again. Hearing the name Ching-ching, Seraphine couldn't hold back her tears. She burst into loud sobs and hugged her mother. Watching this scene, I was very surprised to realize that her mother's facial expressions, way of speaking, and movements were completely different from before. I later found out that due to severe trauma, her mother suffered from split personality disorder, and it was only in very rare instances that Seraphine showed this kind of vulnerability. That was when her third personality emerged, the one who deeply loved her daughter, and the name Ching-ching she called out was the symbol of this mother's return. Seraphine thought, I still have to go. I really won't be able to live without you. Knowing that her mother would soon revert to her angry self, Seraphine became even more desperate to leave. Her desire to study psychology was entirely to treat her mother, so that this mother who truly loved her could stay with her forever. Auntie, if you truly love Seraphine, please entrust her to me. I promise I will never let her suffer any pain. There's no flaw in me. This girl was just born the type who never shares her pain with anyone. Please take good care of her, her mother said, bending down and tightly grasping Seraphine's in my hands. Her hands were as cold as ice, yet they transferred warmth to our skin. She touched the Teru Teru Bozu keychain on Seraphine's suitcase one last time and waved us off with immense love. Seraphine looked back every 3 steps. Her tears had been replaced by a comforting smile. Completely dropping her guard, Seraphine was as excited as a newborn bird. She held her suitcase in one hand and gripped my hand tightly with the other, leaning happily against me. Her gentle touch on my hand affected me too, and I couldn't stop myself from smiling. Even the taxi driver noticed her transformation and joked that she must have hit the jackpot. But I was feeling a strange unease. Before getting into the car, I had clearly felt someone secretly following me. What are you looking at? She asked. Nothing, I smiled and shook my head. Was it really just my imagination? Suppressing my suspicions, I looked out the window one last time. The bell for evening study had just rung, and the scent of book ink and the faint sounds of pages turning echoed through the classroom. Seraphine sat to my right, carefully correcting her notebook of mistakes. Since leaving that suffocating house that afternoon, she had completely transformed, like a plant finally seeing the sunlight. I felt much lighter, too. But I couldn't relax. Ever since I stepped out of the taxi, it felt as if a poisonous snake was glaring at me, and this feeling followed me like a shadow. My 10 years of police experience told me that the stalker had followed us all the way into the school. I pretended to casually twirl a piece of carbon paper in my hand, but my eyes were locked on a shadow reflected in the glass of the classroom's front door. The motion sensor lights in the corridor hadn't turned off, which meant someone was standing in the camera's blind spot, quietly staring at us. Valen, I think I made a mistake calculating the friction. Could you help me look at this? She leaned in close, carrying a faint citrus scent. I took the scratch paper. But just then, my eyes caught the glass of the front door, where a shadow in a black raincoat flashed by. The shadow quickly hid behind the wall. You didn't consider the static friction of the shoe's surface. But don't worry about this question right now. Listen to me, all of you. For the next 5 minutes, no matter what happens, stay in your seats and do not move, I said. What happened in the classroom? Where are you going? Don't be afraid. I am going to catch that stalking creditor who followed us all the way here. Remember, This classroom is the safest place for you because there are many people here. Wait for me to come back." Without giving Seraphine a chance to ask anything else, I suddenly stood up, pushed my chair back, and walked out the back door of the classroom. The moment I stepped into the corridor, all the softness on my face vanished, replaced by the signature ruthlessness of that detective captain from my past life. A name that made serial killers tremble. I deliberately took heavy steps, heading toward the most deserted part of the corridor, the laboratory building. The lighting there was quite dim, and the cameras had been broken for a long time. If the stalker wanted to make a move, it was the perfect place to hunt, and that's exactly what happened. As soon as I reached that cold, dark corridor connecting to the laboratory building, I heard very faint, deliberately suppressed footsteps behind me. The sound of rubber shoes scraping against the terrazzo floor echoed in the empty corridor. I smiled to myself, thinking, the prey has fallen into the trap. I suddenly pushed open the wooden door of the old chemistry lab, slipped into the blind spot behind the door, and held my breath for 10 seconds. A rough hand slowly pushed the door open, and a faint beam of a flashlight pierced the darkness. This was the exact right moment. Like a cheetah, I grabbed the person's wrist from behind the door, locked it perfectly with my left hand, and pushed him outward with all my might using a forceful strike from my knuckles. With a painful scream, the flashlight crashed heavily onto the floor. Without hesitation, I grabbed the back of his head with my right hand and, using the momentum of his forward fall, drove my knee straight into his face. This close-quarters combat was incredibly fast and precise, a completely devastating attack. The stalker instantly lost all strength to resist and collapsed onto the floor, writhing in pain. I planted my foot on his chest, pinning him to the ground. I then bent down, picked up the flashlight, and shined the beam directly onto his face. When I saw that face contorted in pain, my eyes widened in shock. The man lying on the floor was Seraphine's stepfather. This was the same man who had taken a knife to his own stomach to save his crazy wife on that stormy Friday night. His wound was still healing, and he was covered in sweat, yet his bloodshot eyes were fixed on me. A sharp knife had fallen out of his raincoat pocket. "Uncle, you are still recovering in the hospital. Instead of resting with your wife, why are you stalking me in the school wearing these clothes and with that unhealed wound? What do you want? Why are you protecting her like this?" After you left this afternoon, her mother completely broke down in the hospital and kept banging her head against the bed rails. If the doctor hadn't arrived in time and given her a sedative, she wouldn't have survived. As long as Seraphine is in this city, my wife will never get better. She has to disappear from this city entirely. I want to see her dead. Seeing Evander's unhinged state, all the suspicions from my past life rushed back in an instant. On that stormy night in my past life, wearing a raincoat and completely avoiding all cameras, the real killer who ruthlessly murdered Seraphine in that dark alley wasn't some thug. It was this stepfather who had gone mad for his wife. Did he, just like today, disregard his injuries and sneak out of the hospital that night to stalk and kill Seraphine? Without hesitation, I called the police. For attempting to attack me with a knife, I had Evander put into a police car. But even watching that police car speed away, my heart was very heavy, and I couldn't relax. The next morning, using my father's connections in the city under the guise of checking my injuries, I took half a day off. Under that pretext, I entered the surveillance room of the city hospital. "Excuse me, please pull up the CCTV footage of the emergency operating room corridor between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. last Friday night." The screen flickered and skipped to 8:15 p.m. Seraphine's stepfather was rushed into the operating room covered in blood at 8:40 p.m. The red light of the operating room stayed on. Several nurses rushed in and out to fetch blood bags. At 9:20 p.m., he was wheeled out of the operating room with tubes attached to his body and shifted to the ICU. By 11 p.m., no one had entered or left the ICU. For a severely injured person, it was impossible to jump from the third-floor balcony of the hospital. My mind went blank, as if struck by lightning, and my limbs instantly turned ice-cold. In my past life, the forensic doctor had estimated Seraphine's time of death to be around 10:30 p.m. that night. This was evidence that could not be refuted. On that stormy night in my past life, this man was lying on an operating table. It was impossible for him to be in that alley stalking Seraphine. If the killer wasn't her stepfather, then who was it? When I stepped out of the hospital, the afternoon sun was so intense that it blinded my eyes. This solid proof had slid a heavy boulder onto my heart. Who was the killer hiding in the rain in my past life? This unknown terror, where the enemy was in the dark and I was in the light, made me even more anxious than facing the devil directly. I opened the door to my house. It was silent, and the faint smell of cooking food lingered in the air. The scent of shower gel still hovered near my ears. I tiptoed into the guest room. Seraphine was curled up asleep in the bed. She was sleeping quite restlessly. Her long eyelashes fluttered slightly, and her hand subconsciously gripped the corner of the blanket tightly. Seeing her peaceful yet fragile face, most of my anger subsided. I stepped forward and began to fix the thin blanket that had slipped off. but as I looked up, my eyes fell on the guest room window. My movements froze right there. The afternoon sun was slanting across the glass, and outside the window, a dust-covered fingerprint was clearly visible. I got goosebumps. I held my breath, immediately turned around, opened the door, and went out to the green belt outside the house. My suspicion was right. At the edge of the lawn, right outside the guest room window, several plants were crushed, and there were very chaotic shoe prints in the dirt. Those prints pointed directly toward the window where Seraphine was sleeping. My heart began to pound wildly. Someone had just been standing there. I placed my hand on the glass and carefully looked at the sleeping girl through the thin pane. A massive wave of terror washed over me. Those people had really followed me all the way here. Although there were security guards in the complex, they couldn't stop someone hiding with malicious intent. I couldn't just sit idly by. That afternoon, I went straight to the electronics market and bought the best security equipment: night vision, infrared, high-definition cameras, and vibration alarms for the windows. I brought the ladder myself and started setting up the wiring inside and outside the house. The noise woke Seraphine up. Rubbing her eyes in her loose pajamas, she came out of the room. "What are you doing? Why did you buy so many cameras?" I get a little overly anxious. "The first floor is convenient, but it's good to have some extra things for security," I replied. "Hey, come help me hold the ladder. Are you worried about my safety staying home alone?" "You already know, so why are you asking?" Seraphine stood on her tiptoes, trying to hand me the wires. As she did so, her collarbone and some of her fair skin became visible. I looked down and suddenly felt my throat go dry. "Okay, hold it tight. I'm coming down now." As I came down, I looked at her again. Seraphine caught my gaze, and her face instantly turned red. She yelped and let go of the ladder. I lost my balance and fell down. Seraphine immediately spread her arms to catch me. I leaned to one side, put half my weight on her, and pulled her into my arms. "Careful. Did you sprain your ankle?" "I didn't sprain it, but I just got scared, and my legs are trembling a bit." "Nanny, you didn't fulfill your responsibility of protecting me properly. You will have to pay compensation for this. Who told you to act like a thug?" Although she said this, her small, delicate hands hesitated for a moment before gently hugging my waist from behind and hugging me back. The warmth and fragrance of her arms calmed my tense nerves, which had been restless all day, for a little while. After dinner, I sat on the sofa, setting up my computer monitor. Seraphine washed some fresh strawberries and quietly sat next to me. She picked up the largest strawberry with a toothpick and brought it to my lips. I turned my head and looked at the screen. The lawn outside the window and all the surrounding blind spots from where anyone could enter were now under the surveillance of high-definition cameras. If that ghostly figure leaving shoe prints dared to come again, I would make sure he couldn't escape. I said, "Seraphine, from today on, when you are home, do not open the door for anyone except me, and I will come in using my own key. Remember, for no one." "Yes, I will remember." The next afternoon's sun had warmed the street a bit. Seraphine walked beside me with her school bag slung over her shoulder. Her ponytail swung with every step. Ever since she moved into my house and became free from that suffocating home, there was a strange liveliness in her steps. She would often come to me and talk about the mistakes she made in her studies that day. But I couldn't relax at all. That feeling of being secretly stared at, like a needle prick, gripped the back of my neck as soon as we exited the complex gate. "Walk a little more inside. There are a lot of cars outside." "Valen, what's wrong? Your hands are sweating a lot." "Nothing. After setting up all those cameras yesterday afternoon, I didn't sleep well. Let's walk faster. The first period this afternoon is with the homeroom teacher. If we're late, we'll get scolded." On the surface, I looked completely calm, but my eyes were scanning the roadside shops, the green belt, and even the mirrors of cars parked across the street like a radar. There were many people there, and those eyes were very cunning. The situation was so chaotic that it was hard to spot that hidden rat immediately. But I knew he was nearby. As soon as I entered the school gate, Draven's familiar voice echoed from the shadow of the building. He ran up to me, his face red and looking incredibly excited. "Valen, you're amazing! The clue you gave about that wanted criminal actually worked. The police station is in an uproar. Everyone says that bastard is incredibly dangerous. He's wanted in 3 states and has several murders on his head. Did they catch him?" As I said this, Draven's excited face suddenly dropped. "That place is really weird. The police had completely sealed off the old town. There was 3-layer security, so no one could even get close. But it turns out that guy vanished into thin air. I heard he has incredible counter-surveillance skills. Just minutes before the police arrived, he jumped into a dirty sewer and escaped through the drains." My heart pounded. Draven's words were like a cold blade that instantly shattered all my misconceptions. That serial killer from my past life, although not directly linked to Seraphine's death, was a very ruthless and cunning psychopath. His escape from such a heavy police cordon meant he was hiding in some dark corner of this city, like a frightened wild animal. I remembered the dust-covered fingerprint outside the window and those shoe prints on the lawn. Because the real killer from that rainy night in my past life hadn't been exposed yet. Could the person who came spying on my window in the afternoon be that dreaded killer? Did he choose my house, which looks like a rich man's house, as a hiding spot to evade the police? Or was he spying to take revenge on the person who tipped off the police about him? Draven, listen to me carefully. For the next few days, don't go anywhere except school and the hospital. What happened, Valen? I got the reward money, and I was going to throw you a party. The color of your face. That wanted criminal isn't just a murderer. He's a psychopath with no limits. You provided the clues and took the money. As soon as he gets wind of it and finds out you told the police, he will come after you and Auntie first for revenge. No, it can't be that bad. After all, we're from this generation too. He has more blood on his hands than you've seen in your entire life. Stop talking nonsense. After school, go straight to the hospital and lock the ward door from the inside. Even if God calls, don't come out. Understood? Brother, don't scare me. My life has no value, but my mother won't be able to handle all this. After sending Draven away, I stood in the darkness of the corridor. Watching Seraphine studying peacefully in the classroom, a shiver ran down my spine. The suspicion on Evander had been cleared, but the real killer from that rainy night was still hiding somewhere in the dark. And now another serial killer was on the loose. These two unknown terrors of death were entangling and tightening around us. I touched the phone in my pocket, where the surveillance program of my house was running quietly. Whoever those shoe prints outside the window belong to, if you dare to come, I will make you pay a heavy price. After evening study, Seraphine and I were returning home together. Although the night breeze was a bit cold, she felt quite safe being with me. She kept chirping, telling me funny things that happened in class. As soon as we reached home, Seraphine took the initiative, put on an apron, and went into the kitchen. Soon, 2 piping hot bowls of tomato and egg noodles and some side dishes appeared on the table. Valen, taste this. I also made your favorite fried egg today. I deliberately made the edges a bit crispy. Even if you made poison, I would eat it all. You're talking nonsense again. Eat quickly. The noodles will get ruined. In that warm yellow light, her slightly flushed cheeks looked very cute and soft. I ate the food with great relish. Relishing these few moments of peace, Seraphine went to the bathroom to take a shower after dinner. The sound of running water began. I leaned on the sofa, took out my phone, and turned on the courtyard surveillance system I had set up just today. On the screen, with the help of the night vision infrared light, the green belt around the house was clearly visible. I casually started watching the evening video playback. Suddenly, my eyes froze on the screen. Around 6 p.m., even before we arrived home, a strange man wearing a baseball cap wandered in the green belt outside my yard for about 10 minutes. He even tried to peek inside the window several times. I immediately zoomed in on the image to look closely at the man's face. He was a bit chubby, and his eyes were droopy. I instantly recalled the police wanted poster in my mind. This wasn't him. The wanted criminal was a skinny man with prominent cheekbones. If this wasn't the escaped criminal, then where did this rat come from? Was this the same real killer from my past life doing reconnaissance? This realization that the enemy was in the dark while I was in the light made me very anxious. An escaped serial killer, the unknown murderer from my past life, and now another stranger keeping an eye on us in broad daylight. I felt as if I was trapped right in the middle of a massive black vortex. It was 1 a.m., and a deathly silence had fallen over the entire complex. I was lying on the bed in the master bedroom. My eyes were closed, but my nerves were completely alert and tense, exactly like how I lived as a detective in my past life. Suddenly, a very faint clicking sound came from outside, followed by the sound of very light footsteps intentionally walking on their heels, slowly approaching the large living room window. I woke up instantly like a cheetah. I rolled out of bed without making a sound. My feet made no noise on the floor. I hugged the wall and inched my way to the dark corner by the living room window. In the faint moonlight, through the gap between the curtains, I could clearly see a thin, dark shadow pressed against the outer wall of my house. The shadow was fumbling with something on the window pane. He even tried to gently push the window open. My muscles tensed instantly. If he did anything wrong, I was determined to stop him right there. But I held myself back. I didn't want to startle him. I wanted to see what he was trying to do and if someone else was with him. Time passed, and the shadow stayed outside the window for about 2 to 3 minutes. It seemed he realized the window was locked from the inside, or perhaps he sensed some danger. He stopped abruptly, turned, and quickly disappeared into the darkness of the complex's green belt. My first instinct was to open the door, run out, and catch him. But as I touched the door handle, my hand stopped. I turned and looked at the firmly closed guest room door. Seraphine was still fast asleep inside. Ensuring Seraphine's absolute safety was more important than catching this rat. Suppressing the murderous rage inside me, I turned and went to the coffee table. I quickly turned on the surveillance computer and pulled up the infrared video playback of that spot. The video rewound, and the dark shadow appeared on the screen. The resolution of this top-class security system was excellent. Even the wrinkles on the person's clothes were clearly visible. I started staring intensely at the screen. I dragged the progress bar to the moment the shadow turned to leave. As he suddenly turned, the infrared camera recorded his face perfectly. The moment I saw that face, my eyes widened in shock. My mind went numb, and I felt as if I had been struck on the head by something heavy. That face, which was always hidden behind thick hair, a face that always seemed timid and isolated. How could it be Cassiel? That boy in class who was always beaten by thugs. Why was he standing outside my window like a ghost in the middle of the night? The dim blue light of the computer screen cast onto my face. I sat alone on that dark sofa, the light seemingly hiding in the darkness. I was subconsciously tapping my knees. My brain was working like a high-speed computer, frantically piecing together all these bizarre events. The strange, chubby man seen during the day, Cassiel at night, and that dust-covered fingerprint on the guest room window. What was the connection between these three things? If that fingerprint belonged to the chubby man from earlier, why was he just wandering in the green belt doing nothing? Who sent him? I took a deep breath and set aside the clue about the chubby man for a moment. My eyes were fixed on the screen. Cassiel's numb face looked more terrifying than the chubby man's, sending a shiver down my spine. A scared, quiet boy who didn't even have the courage to fight back against thugs asking for money. How could he demonstrate such high-level espionage skills at 1 a.m.? How could he appear outside my window like a ghost? Once my detective reasoning kicks in, all those small details from my past life that I had overlooked start coming back to me. A flood of memories surged into my mind. That stormy night in my past life. Cassiel was also near the murder scene that night. He was being beaten by thugs in that dark alley. Seraphine had seen this while coming out of the convenience store, and this is what led her into that deadly alley. In my past life, I always thought Cassiel was just an unlucky person who got caught there by mistake. But now, that same victim was standing outside my window in the middle of the night. Was Cassiel the killer who stole that fruit knife and brutally murdered Seraphine in the rain during my past life? This thought had just entered my mind when my sharp criminal investigation brain rapidly began connecting the events. I closed my eyes and tried to recall the atmosphere after Seraphine's death in my past life. The whole school was in an uproar, and the police came to the school every day to take statements. Every child was terrified. But what about Cassiel? In the days following Seraphine's death, Cassiel would sit in a corner like a ghost. He showed no panic or fear. There wasn't even a single emotion on his face. His calmness was like a frozen pond. No, I understand criminal psychology very well. Faced with such intense police presence and interrogation, it was impossible for him to remain completely calm. Behind that false calmness lay a terrifying psychological strength and incomprehensible cunning. A boy who trembles in fear just from being beaten and cursed at, how could he possess the resilience of a psychopathic killer? If he was truly that cunning, then his timid and submissive behavior at school was just an act. He was like a venomous snake hidden in a flock of sheep, quietly observing everything with utter ruthlessness. The clock on the wall ticked, and I felt a chill within me. If Cassiel was indeed the ruthless killer from my past life, then his arrival here tonight, did it mean he had chosen Seraphine and me as his prey in this life too, and was playing games with us? Whatever hides behind that mask, whether you are human or a ghost, I will expose you. I stood up, went to the guest room door, and gently checked if it was locked from the inside. Hearing Seraphine's peaceful breathing from inside, I clenched my fists. This time Baum is present in the classroom. I cannot just leave him be. I decided to go to school tomorrow. I must find Cassiel. I have to tear off the mask from his innocent face and get to the very bottom of the truth about that stormy night and tonight. The morning sunlight filtered through the balcony lattice, scattering its golden rays on the wooden floor. I opened the bedroom door. The sizzling sound of frying bacon came from the kitchen, accompanied by the aroma of toasted bread. Seraphine was wearing a white sweatshirt. She stood on her tiptoes, doing something on the glass counter. The golden sunlight highlighted her slender, lovely face. This sight was so beautiful that I forgot all the terrifying things from last night for a moment. You're up? Go wash your face. The sandwich is almost ready. I added some extra cheese today, which you really like. You are so good. Whoever marries you will be very lucky. Teasing me early in the morning. Go wash your face. After washing my face, I sat at the table. I watched her take small bites of the sandwich. A bit of white salad dressing accidentally got on the corner of her lips. I didn't say anything, just reached out and gently wiped the dressing away with my fingers. She was eating exactly like a little kitten with something on its mouth. This moment of peace felt just like the calm before a storm. I drank the last sip of milk. The terror of last night's CCTV footage was hidden deep in my eyes. No matter how many monsters and demons were outside, in this house, I only wanted to give her sunshine. After breakfast, Seraphine and I were walking together on that tree-lined path to school. It was morning. The streets were full of traffic, school children in uniforms, and people going to work. We were walking fast. But as soon as we crossed a traffic light, I felt that strange, snake-like glare on my neck again. My muscles tensed instantly. The feeling was intense. Even in the midst of this crowd, a very cold gaze was fixed on me and Seraphine. "The strap of your backpack looks a bit loose," I said, pretending to adjust it. While I fixed her bag, my eyes scanned the glass of the newsstand, the blind spot behind the bus stop, and even the mirrors of cars parked across the street like a radar. There were many people there, and catching that gaze was very difficult. The situation was so chaotic that I couldn't immediately find that rat. But I knew he was nearby. "Thank you, Valen. It's much more comfortable to wear it like this. Come on, class is about to start." Accompanied by that constant feeling of being watched, we finally stepped into the classroom, which echoed with the noise of morning reading. I told Seraphine to go to her seat, and I stood at the back door. My eyes shot like a sharp blade straight to the last row, to the seat that was always in the shadows. My heart sank. That seat was empty. The desk was completely clean. There wasn't a single book on it. "What is Draven studying?" I wondered. "Oh, you're asking about Cassiel?" someone said. "That quiet boy. He didn't come today. I heard the homeroom teacher say he has a high fever and can't even get out of bed." Draven's casual remark created a storm in my mind. "You said he's sick?" "Yeah, Valen. Why are you so shocked? He gets beaten up all the time, so him falling sick isn't a big deal, right?" I left Draven and slowly walked back to my seat. My hands were already sweating. At 1 a.m., he was outside my window like a ghost, executing high-level espionage. This morning, on our way to school, we constantly felt a very dangerous, stalking gaze. And now he has a high fever and didn't come to school. All these clues suddenly connected. A very terrifying truth was emerging. If he didn't come to school, where would he be now? The answer was almost clear. The person staring at us on the street this morning is now hiding in the dark, stalking us like a venomous snake. He is 100% the unknown killer who stole that fruit knife and brutally murdered Seraphine in my past life. The psycho who came to my window at night and stalked us on the street in the morning. He was now morphing in my mind into that pale, timid face hidden behind thick hair. What secret lay behind this? As soon as the school bell rang, I took Seraphine to the class directory. Cassiel's apartment address was in a very ordinary residential complex. Although it was a bit old, the environment was quite clean. I went to the 3rd floor and knocked on the security door, but there was no answer. I was just pondering this when an elderly neighbor came out with a trash bag. "Stop knocking," she said. "Looking for Cassiel's family? They left here very early this morning, before dawn. They had many bags, big and small. They said there was an emergency at a relative's place in the village, so they left this apartment." "Auntie, you mean they left before dawn?" "Yes, around 5 a.m. Their truck made a lot of noise. I also thought they were being too loud." The elderly woman's words fell on my head like ice water. They left before dawn? Then what happened today? This morning when I was coming to school with Seraphine, I constantly felt that terrifying sensation of being watched. If that wasn't Cassiel, then who was it? My mind started racing, and cold sweat broke out on my back. If it wasn't Cassiel following us this morning, that meant besides Cassiel touching my window last night, someone else was also staring at me in broad daylight. Was it the chubby stranger seen during the day? Was it the escaped serial killer? Or was it the real killer from that rainy night in my past life? I suppressed my panic, grabbed Seraphine's hand, and decided to take her home first to figure out what to do next. But when we reached the door of our house, we saw an uninvited guest standing in the corridor. It was a middle-aged man wearing an expensive suit, his hair neatly styled. There were wrinkles on his forehead, his face was pale, and he was pacing back and forth. His demeanor exuded a strange authority and suppressed anger. When I recognized him, Seraphine, who was standing next to me, went numb and tightly gripped my hand in fear. "Seraphine, do you even know that I am your father?" Alaric stepped forward and pulled Seraphine away from me. "Seraphine, do you know what you are doing? Your mother is still in the hospital. Her condition is bad due to illness, and you just left her like that. Not only that, you are a young girl. At such a young age, you have moved in with a boy outside. What will people say?" Hearing this harsh scolding from her father, Seraphine's eyes instantly turned red. But this time, she didn't step back. Instead, she freed herself from Alaric's grasp. "What right do you have to scold me? You were the one who left my mother first. If it wasn't because of you, she wouldn't be in this condition today. What do you know about adults' matters? Have I given you any less money for your expenses every month? Now your mother is sick, and you ran away. Pack your things and let's go home immediately. I will not let my daughter endure such infamy outside. I won't go. I have nothing to do with you, and I will not step through the door of your house. I will figure out a way to treat my mother myself. You don't need to worry about it." Enraged, Alaric tried to grab Seraphine's hand by force. I stepped forward and stood like a wall in front of Seraphine, looking into Alaric's eyes with extreme coldness. Uncle, Seraphine has made it very clear. She doesn't want to go with you. Forcing her like this might not end well for you. Valen, don't think that just because your family has some influence in the city, you can kidnap my daughter like this. This is our family's matter. He looked at Seraphine, whom I was firmly hiding behind me, and then met my cold, dangerous gaze. After weighing everything, he abandoned the thought of taking Seraphine by force. Valen, listen to me carefully. If she gets even a single scratch because of you, my family will make you pay a heavy price for it. Seraphine, answer me, Alaric said, glaring at Seraphine. With the heavy sound of his leather shoes, Alaric turned, full of anger and helplessness, and walked out of the corridor. Watching him leave, I brought Seraphine inside the house and locked the security door. Seraphine was still a bit sad and quietly went to the kitchen to get water. I sat on the sofa, the wrinkles on my forehead deepening. Alaric's act of saving his daughter seemed very strange to me. Something was wrong. He had ruthlessly abandoned his daughter years ago, never caring for her, and didn't even show his face when her mother went mad. So why was he suddenly standing at my door today, acting so concerned about his daughter's life? I suppressed my unease, my suspicions vanished, and I casually clicked on the computer screen connected to the security cameras. As the screen lit up, my eyes widened in shock. It was the same chubby man, the one with droopy eyes who appeared in last night's footage. He had returned to the green belt below my apartment. Hiding behind an electricity pole, he was staring suspiciously at my window. Death has come for you, walking right up to my door. Today, I'll skin you alive. I immediately took out my phone and called Draven, who lived nearby. Draven, grab your weapons and come downstairs. I want us to surround him from both sides so he can't escape. 5 minutes later, panting heavily, Draven reached the other end of the alley. I signaled him, and we surrounded the man from all sides. I lunged at the chubby man from the right. Just as he was about to run, Draven blocked his path. I jumped from behind and delivered a powerful kick to the back of his knee. The chubby man screamed and fell to his knees. I twisted his arm and forcefully scraped his face against the rough wall. I've been following you for 2 days. Who sent you? Oh, brother, let me go. I haven't done anything. If you haven't done anything, then what are you doing here? Tell the truth, or I'll break all your teeth today. I'm telling the truth. 3 days ago, a masked woman came to me. What did she ask you to do? Murder or kidnapping? You were the one following us this morning. No, brother. I don't have the courage to do anything illegal. That woman just gave me your photo and address and told me to keep a daily record. What time you leave and come home? Is there any other adult at home? I swear I absolutely did not follow you on the street. My job was just to hide outside this complex and note the times. Aha! What does he look like? Who is he? I really don't know. She gave me money and then disappeared. She didn't leave any number either. Brother, I'm just trying to earn my living. I'll give you all the money back. Please let me go. I looked deeply into the chubby man's eyes. 10 years of criminal investigation experience told me he wasn't lying. He really was just a pawn being used. The clue broke completely once again. I let him go, and the chubby man stumbled and ran out of the alley. Draven stood beside me cursing, but I felt an overwhelming exhaustion and disappointment. The persistent stalker wasn't this chubby man, nor was it Cassiel, who had moved away overnight. The real killer was still hiding like an invisible ghost. The person who paid this chubby man was simply trying to understand our routine, which meant they were planning a very dangerous plot. After sending Draven back, I returned home alone. Seraphine was already asleep. I collapsed on the sofa in exhaustion, rubbing my aching forehead. I looked at the security camera mounted on the wall. Everything looked normal outside the window by the first-floor gate on the complex's main road. Wait. My eyes suddenly darted to screen number 2. This was the built-in infrared camera above the door meant to monitor the corridor's blind spots. When I installed and tested it myself yesterday, the red metal box of the fire hydrant was clearly visible on the lower right side of the screen. But now, the camera had rotated about 15 degrees to the left, and that box was completely out of the frame. In its place, a massive blind spot had formed at the edge of the door. My blood froze. Someone had tampered with my camera. This couldn't have been caused by the wind. The camera was firmly screwed to the wall. Just now, when Draven and I went downstairs to catch the chubby man, it was only a 10-minute window. Within those 10 minutes, someone quietly came to my door and, very professionally avoiding the camera's direct line of sight, deliberately rotated it to create a blind spot. It truly was a devil crawling in the dark, and he had been right outside my door just moments ago. I sat alone on the living room sofa, staring at the screen of the camera that had been rotated to create a blind spot. My mind was racing, processing everything that happened throughout the day. The strange chubby man during the day, the dust and fingerprints outside the second-floor window, the ghostly shadow sneaking around at night, and now the person who quietly rotated the camera. All these things were connecting, and my biggest suspicion was still on Cassiel. Just as I furrowed my brow, wondering about his motives, there was a sudden knock on the door. I very carefully opened the door, and Draven, who had just left, was standing outside. "You came back? Oh, Valen, I forgot to tell you. This morning, Cassiel gave me 2 things to return to you." "Oh, what is it?" "He told me to return these 2 things to you. He also asked me to tell you that he actually came to see you last night. I wanted to come down myself to thank you for your help, but it was very late, and I didn't want to disturb your sleep, so I stood outside for a while and then left." Hearing Draven's words, my mind went numb. At 1 a.m., Cassiel had come outside the window only to return something. It was also true that his entire family had moved away. He hadn't followed me on the street, and he didn't have time to come and rotate my camera. My suspicion of Cassiel vanished completely in that instant. The only clue I had found broke as well. I collapsed on the sofa, feeling very confused and disappointed. If it wasn't Cassiel, then who rotated the camera, and who was secretly keeping an eye on us? When I couldn't understand anything, Draven suddenly took out his phone, showed me a photo, and handed the phone to me. "By the way, Valen, I wanted to ask you, is the man in this photo hired by your family for you? Your bodyguard? I've always seen him wandering around your area. Just now, when I was catching that chubby man in the alley, I saw him outside your complex again." I jerked my head up and took the phone. The photo was taken in a very dimly lit corner. It showed a man wearing a baseball cap, and I could only see his side profile. Without hesitation, I stared at the photo on Draven's phone, immediately took out my own phone, sent it to my mother, and then called her. "Hello, Mom. Did you send the man in the photo?" There was silence on the phone for 2 seconds, and then my mother's very surprised voice came through. "Son, you actually found him. He is a retired mercenary hired by your father for a lot of money. We were very worried about you living alone, so we secretly hired him for your protection. He has been following you for some time, so you really did this without telling me." Hearing the words "retired mercenary," my tense nerves jumped. His responsibility is only to check for any danger around you, not to spy on you. If you are not okay with this, your father and I can remove him. There's no need for that. It's just that I recently found some strange shoe prints outside the guest room window, which made me sense danger. But why is he checking my security outside the guest room window? Didn't you say earlier that Seraphine was going to stay in our guest room? I thought I would ask him to check if the guest room windows are strong and the security bars are secure. My mom sent me his number. After hanging up, a number quickly popped up on my phone. "Wow! So is he really your bodyguard or a mercenary? Valen, your security is top-notch." I ignored Draven's words. My eyes were fixed on the number on the screen. My mind was racing. A retired mercenary. If that was the case, it was the perfect explanation for all those bizarre events. The dust-covered fingerprint outside the window, and the rotated security camera. These could all be the marks of that mercenary checking the area's security or deliberately trying to evade my surveillance equipment. It seemed all the leads were closed off again. The tracks I was about to catch had all disappeared. I immediately had to talk to that mercenary to confirm the fingerprint on the window and the rotated camera. I took a deep breath and dialed the number my mother sent. The phone was answered after just 1 ring. "Hello, young master. Is this Uncle Theron? I am Valen. Are you feeling better now? What are your orders for me?" "Uncle Theron, the fingerprints on the guest bedroom window and the rotated security camera near the door. You did all that, right?" "Yes, young master. Your counter-surveillance skills are truly amazing. Your agility surpasses even some of the new recruits I've trained. Young master, this afternoon, when I was checking for nearby threats, I noticed that all the screws on the security window of your guest bedroom had rusted and become loose. They could have been opened with a little force. I replaced all of them for you with very strong titanium alloy screws and rubbed some ash on them to make them look old. I didn't realize the ash from my gloves would leave a mark on the glass. As for the security camera near the door, although that angle was fine for general security, from a riot prevention perspective, there was a 1-second blind spot on the side. So, I adjusted it slightly for you." "Okay, I understand. Uncle Theron, thank you for your hard work." After hanging up, I tiptoed into the guest bedroom. Seraphine was fast asleep, breathing peacefully. I went to the window and carefully checked it in the dim light outside, and it was true. The screws on the edges of the security bars, which looked rusty, had all been replaced with very strong new screws. Although they were hidden very well, I let out a long sigh of relief. There was no crazy stalker, nor a professional killer. All those terrifying and ghostly events were actually the work of my own top bodyguard eliminating security threats. But just as this final tension dissipated, I felt a wave of exhaustion and confusion enough to drown anyone. I sat on the living room sofa, staring at the empty room. That chubby man who did the job for money had no clues. Cassiel was gone, and the suspicion on him was completely cleared. Evander had a solid alibi of being in the hospital. The escaped serial killer also had nothing to do with my past life's murder case. All leads had hit a dead end. The real killer who ruthlessly stole that fruit knife and killed Seraphine on that stormy night in my past life was still hiding like a faceless ghost among so many people. This feeling of helplessness, like punching cotton, broke me from the inside. The immense stress and tension of the past 2 days, combined with the chill from last night's rain, finally broke my body. Darkness began to cloud my vision. Everything around me started spinning. My stomach cramped, and my throat became incredibly dry. I tried to get up to drink water, but my legs gave out, and I collapsed heavily onto the sofa, completely losing consciousness. It felt as if I had fallen into a boiling fire. The bloody rain from my past life and Seraphine's pale face repeatedly entangled in my dreams, torturing me. Valen, wake up! Through my delirium, a very gentle and panicked voice echoed in my ears. Suddenly, I felt a cold and soothing touch on my forehead, which somewhat calmed the fire raging inside me. I tried to open my heavy eyelids, and when my vision cleared, I saw Seraphine's small face, filled with worry and looking slightly pale. Valen, you're finally awake. You scared me to death. How did you get such a high fever? I opened my mouth, but my throat was so dry that no sound came out. I tried to sit up, but found myself lying in the master bedroom's bed, covered with a thick blanket and a cold, wet towel placed on my forehead. I'm fine, I rasped. I probably caught a cold last night. What cold? It's a 39.8 degrees Celsius fever, Seraphine said. This morning when I woke up, I saw you lying unconscious on the sofa. Your body was burning like fire. She handed me water, saying, "Drink some water to soothe your throat. I've already asked the homeroom teacher for a leave. We will rest at home today." That warm water brought some life back to my dry throat. I watched her bustling around. Her eyes were red. It was clear that ever since she noticed my fever, she had been sitting constantly by my bedside. She gave me fever-reducing medicine, feeding it to me with her own hands. "If the fever doesn't go down by afternoon, we will go to the hospital and get an IV drip," she said, tightly holding my hands. "Valen, don't be afraid," she said softly. "Even though I don't know what you're worried about, it's my turn to take care of you now. You sleep. I'm not going anywhere." I kept looking at her, feeling her unwavering gaze and the genuine warmth of her hands. My nerves, which had been stretched to the breaking point, finally relaxed in this moment. Under the effect of the medicine and the fever, I closed my eyes again and fell into a deep sleep. In my dream, I suddenly returned to my past life. My colleagues enthusiastically welcomed me. "Valen, we found a huge clue in the case you were worried about. It's someone familiar. We caught him. Go see him," I asked frantically. "Who is it?" A flash of white light woke me up. When I woke up again, the sky outside the window had already turned dark. The last rays of the setting sun filtered through the half-open curtains, casting a warm orange-red hue on the bedsheets. I realized the ache in my body had lessened significantly, and the burning sensation on my forehead had also subsided. I turned my head slightly and saw Seraphine sleeping on the edge of the bed. She looked very exhausted. There were faint, dark circles under her eyes, and she was still holding the ice towel she had used to cool me down. As if sensing the change in my breathing, she woke up suddenly like a startled fawn. "Great, the fever has finally broken. Valen, are you hungry? There is some warm rice porridge in the pot. Let me get it for you. Leave it. Sit by me for a while." I held her hand tightly, feeling the real warmth of her palm. My fingers greedily sought the beating pulse in her wrist. Looking at this lively and beautiful girl sitting in front of me, an unknown and profound terror suddenly wrapped around my heart like a venomous snake. Since my rebirth, this was the first time I felt such intense fear. I was afraid that this might all just be a dream. I feared that, as soon as I found the real killer and completely altered her fate, completing this cycle, this second life might end. Would I suddenly be pulled back to that cold timeline where only her grave existed? I selfishly wanted time to stop right here. If I didn't investigate, if I just hid her in this high-security safe house, could we live peacefully like this forever? But seeing the unwavering trust in her eyes looking back at me, I gritted my teeth. "Valen, what's wrong? Are you feeling dizzy again?" "Nothing. I just feel a bit clear-headed now. I'm a little hungry." "Okay, lean on me and don't move. I'll bring you something to eat. After you eat, I'll check your temperature too." Watching Seraphine walk out of the bedroom and close the door like an obedient child, all the softness on my face vanished instantly, replaced by an extremely dangerous coldness and restlessness. I gripped my phone so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My brain felt as if lightning had ripped it open. Retired mercenary Uncle Theron. My mother said Uncle Theron had been secretly protecting me for quite some time. Then surely he must have been around me on that rainy Friday night last week as well. That night, Seraphine knocked on my door in the pouring rain and was later murdered in that dark alley. Although by a twist of fate, she was inside my house this time, could that devil hiding in the dark, the one who was actually supposed to kill her, have continued following her? Did he follow her that night? Even tracking her all the way to my building? If so, Uncle Theron, who was secretly protecting me, would have definitely noticed that stalker with his sharp eyes, honed through countless life and death experiences. Without hesitation, I quickly pulled up that unlisted phone number and pressed the dial button. The phone was answered after just half a ring. Uncle Theron, it's Valen. Are you feeling better now? What are your orders for me? Uncle Theron, last Friday night during the heavy rain, around 9:30 p.m., a girl who was completely soaked knocked on my door. You were probably guarding the area around my apartment at that time, right? Yes, I was on the roof of the opposite building checking blind spots. I saw that girl knocking on the door. Did you notice if any suspicious person was following her, or if someone trailed her to my complex, or watched her from the shadows? After asking these questions, I felt as if the air around me had frozen. There was silence on the other end of the line for a moment, only a faint static echoing in my ears. The silence lasted for only 2 seconds, and then Uncle Theron's deep voice came through. Young master, there really was someone there. My heart felt as if it had been struck by a hammer, and my blood boiled instantly. The rain was very heavy that night. The person was wearing a long black raincoat and a mask, trailing the girl from about 50 meters away. After that, until I saw the girl enter your apartment building, the person stood across the street under the streetlight for about 2 or 3 minutes and then turned and left. I never saw him again after that. In my past life, Seraphine had never entered my house, so this devil got the chance to attack her in that alley. In this life, because Seraphine hid in my house, she completely escaped the killer's grasp, so he could only watch helplessly as his prey slipped away into the rain and had to give up. Uncle Theron, did you see his face clearly at that time? Can you find out who this person is? The rain was very heavy, the streetlights were dim, and the person had completely covered himself, so I couldn't see his face. However, even though I didn't follow him, I distinctly remember which alley he turned into when he left. Young master, as long as he passed through there, he must have left some trace. Uncle, I want to know who he is. After hanging up the phone, I took a deep breath and completely suppressed the anger welling up in my eyes. Just then, the door opened softly. The porridge was ready, and its temperature was perfect. Seeing her gentle and calm face wearing an apron, the storm raging in my heart over nearing the truth calmed instantly. The doctor said the stomach gets weak after a fever breaks. You should drink something light first to fill your stomach. Have you eaten anything since you started taking care of me? I had a small bowl in the kitchen. Eat quickly, don't talk. The patient doesn't have the strength to lift his hand. I can only trouble my nanny to feed me spoon by spoon. Seraphine shot me a complaining look. In this bedroom bathed in warm light, the conspiracies and murderous intentions outside the window felt completely isolated. The next morning, I watched Seraphine go to school and sent Uncle Theron to secretly protect her. After ensuring the security door was closed and Seraphine was far away, the softness in my eyes disappeared instantly. I quickly dressed in black casual clothes, put on a baseball cap, opened the door, and set out. A few hours later, I met Uncle Theron in an alley behind an internet cafe near the murder area. Young master, this is all the private CCTV footage of that area from last Friday night. I spent the whole night copying it. Thank you for your hard work, Uncle Theron. Uncle Theron and I stared at the computer screen. Although the footage was a bit blurry due to the heavy rain, the shadow of the person passing under the streetlights was still clearly visible. Looking at the person's estimated height and gait on the screen, I quickly searched my memories. I recognized him instantly. A name echoed in my mind. There was no mistaking it. That height and build were definitely his. Bastien, Callista's younger brother. In the evening, I heard the sound of the key turning in the security door. Seraphine came in with her school bag slung over her shoulder and immediately saw me sitting on the sofa. She ran to me right away. Valen, are you feeling better now? Are you still dizzy? I'm perfectly fine now. The fever is gone. Don't worry, that's good. I was so worried all day at school. I was afraid you'd be home alone with no one to take care of you. We sat huddled together on the sofa for a while, soaking in the peace. Then, I suppressed my smile and looked into her eyes. Seraphine, I have some business to take care of. It might take 2 days. You're leaving for 2 days? You just recovered? It's nothing serious. Just some personal matters I need to settle. I'll be back soon. Wait for me at home like a good girl for these 2 days. Don't go anywhere. Okay, I'll wait for you at home. Take care of yourself outside. On Saturday morning at 9 a.m., dark clouds covered the sky outside the window, and soon, a heavy, torrential downpour began. Seraphine, who was afraid of storms, sat curled up on the sofa, wrapped tightly in a blanket. Meanwhile, I was in a vacant, unfinished building in the city. I was wearing a mask and a voice changer, standing in front of a man who was blindfolded and had his hands tied behind his back. His name was Bastien, the target of my secret investigation for the past few days. He had a habit of jogging every morning, and I took advantage of that to tie him up. In my past life, As a criminal investigator, I had to work within the bounds of laws and regulations. But now, to uncover the truth hidden in the files as quickly as possible, I had to use some special methods. What are you doing? My family doesn't have money. Let me go. I promise I won't call the police. If I wanted to kidnap you for money, what would be the point of this? Now it's my turn to ask questions, and since I caught you so easily, it means I know everything about you. Don't try any tricks. I gently rested a cold glass bottle against his neck. In that darkness and terror, he instantly began to tremble like a dry leaf. Just ask me anything. I'll tell you whatever I know. Think carefully. What did you do half a month ago on that rainy Friday night? To increase his psychological pressure, I didn't specify a time, and it worked perfectly. He recalled nervously and stuttered that he had invited a classmate over to do homework. If I pour a few drops on your face, it will surely have a huge effect, right? No, I'll tell you. I met my classmate that afternoon, but I went out that night. I went to follow a girl. Leaving a classmate and going out in the heavy rain to follow a girl? I needed a reason to believe him. Really, it was my sister's plan. My sister asked me to do it. Bastian's sister was Callista, Alaric's current wife. I immediately unlocked his phone using his fingerprint and checked the chat history from that day. I was right. The records clearly showed that Callista told Bastian to leave his classmate at home, immediately go downstairs, and wait for Seraphine, who had just left their house. At first, I couldn't understand why Bastian would do something so strange, inviting a girl over and then leaving her to stalk someone else in the rain. Now it all made sense. The chat history also revealed that Bastian had followed Seraphine all the way to my building. After finding out that Seraphine had gone to a boy's house, Callista told him to wait a few minutes, but when Seraphine didn't come out, she told him to go back. In other words, in that rainy night of my past life, Bastian's stalking ended the moment Seraphine knocked on my door. If Bastian's only responsibility was to follow her and he had no intention of killing her, then how was Seraphine murdered in my past life? Combining this with the autopsy report from my past life, Seraphine's clothes were disheveled, but there were no clear signs of struggle, restraint, or pressure on her body, which meant she wasn't assaulted. The murder weapon was brought by Seraphine herself. The only reason that fruit knife was used could be that Callista found Seraphine later, and an argument ensued between them. Given Callista's domineering nature and her hatred for her stepdaughter, it was very likely that their conversation went awry, and in a fit of rage, she committed the murder. Although there was still a lack of solid proof, the picture of the truth was becoming clear. At least Bastian's lead ended here. Get out of here. Don't look back, or you know the consequences. Bastian, as if granted a pardon, fled the unfinished building. I went to the top floor of the unfinished building alone and let the cold rain fall on me. That cold water instantly cleared my mind. The purpose of my rebirth rested on two things. First, finding the real killer. Second, protecting Seraphine from any further harm. Now, Seraphine is living peacefully in my house. As long as I prevent her from meeting Callista in the future, the potential threat is permanently averted. As for the real killer, my suspicion was now completely on Callista, but there was no solid proof. Judging by the results, I had successfully altered Seraphine's fate. But what if the killer was someone else? At that moment, lightning flashed loudly in the sky, illuminating the entire city for a split second. The next moment, everything went black, followed by a very strange and magical display of light and shadows. When I regained my senses, I saw Seraphine standing next to me. Not standing, but floating in the air. Was I dreaming again? I stared at this sight in shock. Right now, Seraphine looked exactly as I had seen her in my dreams as a detective in my past life. There was always a very faint, almost imperceptible smile on her face, but right now, her face clearly showed concern for me. She just stared at me silently without saying a word. When I saw this familiar Seraphine in front of me, I felt as if I had gone back in time again. I quickly looked around and realized that I wasn't on the roof of the police station, but right outside the door of my own house. While I was lost in these confusions and questions, a girl completely drenched in rain slowly walked toward me. Drops of water were dripping from her hair and collar. She had her arms crossed and slowly walked up to my door. I stood there, surprised to see that this past version of Seraphine couldn't see me at all. I turned my head in confusion and looked at the ghostly Seraphine floating next to me. She looked at me with empty eyes and then turned back to look at her past self. Seeing this, I turned my head again and watched the completely drenched Seraphine standing in front of me. She stood at the door and didn't ring the doorbell immediately. It seemed as if she was conflicted about something. She thought for a while and slowly reached out her hand, but stopped right before touching the doorbell. After hesitating again and taking a deep breath, she finally gathered the courage to ring it. As the ding-dong echoed, her body trembled violently, and she quickly pulled her hand back, hugging herself again. She looked very timid and awkward. A few moments later, the door opened, and it was my past self who opened the door. This was the first time I was seeing my past self through a third person's perspective. I didn't know if I was dreaming or what, but I stood there, and my past self couldn't see me or the ghostly Seraphine. I didn't think much about it and just quietly watched everything happen exactly as I remembered. Seraphine asked to stay the night. But at that time, I was very young, and I was afraid that if my parents found out, they would scold me. I didn't have the courage to easily let a girl inside who was almost completely soaked and in see-through clothes. I thought she was having trouble going home, so I offered to drop her off. I went to get a raincoat and umbrella, but as soon as I turned, Seraphine hesitated for a moment and then left sadly. Seeing this, I ignored my past self, looking for the umbrella inside the house, and immediately ran after Seraphine. I knew very well what I was doing back then, but I had absolutely no idea what Seraphine had endured that night after being turned away from there. Even if this was just a dream, I wanted to see how this dream would recreate her experience from that night. When I caught up to Seraphine, I saw that the girl's face was completely numb. She didn't know where to go. She didn't want me to know about her family's troubles, so she didn't have the courage to take me home with her. But after turning down my help, where could she go? The world was so big, yet there was no place for her. Her mother, her father, those 3 places she considered home. It seemed none of them had left any room for her. She walked aimlessly until she reached a convenience store, and suddenly her stomach rumbled. She remembered she hadn't eaten anything since the afternoon. She used her remaining money to buy a piece of bread and a glass of milk for dinner. The store employee, seeing her completely soaked, immediately gave her a towel to dry off and, before she left, kindly handed her an umbrella, saying, "You can pay next time. The rain is very heavy. Girls shouldn't get this wet. It's not good for health." Seraphine declined, but the employee's generosity forced her to say thank you. She opened the umbrella and was about to leave when she suddenly saw a familiar figure. She looked closely and saw Cassiel, surrounded by 3 thugs in a corner, being beaten. After a moment of hesitation, she gathered her courage and approached them. "Stop. If you guys keep beating him like this, I will call the police," she yelled. She panicked and tried to pull out her phone, only to remember that her mother had smashed it before she left the house. Seeing her empty pockets, the thugs mocked, "Looks like you forgot to bring your phone. All right, beautiful. We won't beat him, but you have to stay here." As the 3 of them advanced towards Seraphine, Cassiel, who had been silently taking the beating without fighting back, suddenly struggled to his feet and stood firmly in front of Seraphine. "This has nothing to do with her. You should leave right now," Cassiel said. The thugs yelled, "It's too late to run now. Grab her." Seeing 2 thugs approaching to grab Seraphine, Cassiel, always the submissive and polite one, suddenly went crazy. The anger of a loud person is not that scary. But when a quiet, polite person crosses their limits and loses their patience, it's terrifying. Cassiel attacked the 3 of them like a mad dog. He took punches and kicks, but he used every part of his body he could to fight back. Cassiel bit one thug's hand so hard that he screamed in pain. The next moment, Cassiel targeted another boy standing nearby and bit him hard too. No matter how much they hit him, he didn't let go, almost tearing a chunk of flesh from that boy's hand. He only let go when the boy fell to his knees and begged. Seeing his 2 companions bitten so badly, the blonde thug also got scared. Some were terrified, some were numb, and some feared for their lives. This boy was clearly a psychopath. The 3 of them threw out an empty threat and fled in panic. I knew those 3 had knives, but they only used them to scare people. They didn't actually have the courage to stab Cassiel. Cassiel's terrifying behavior had completely frightened them off. I suddenly realized that the injuries I saw on Cassiel's body at school in my past life were actually sustained from saving Seraphine. Seeing the 3 run away, the brave Cassiel collapsed into the mud, disregarding the heavy rain. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Thank you. We are all classmates. There's no need to be so formal. You just saved me too, so we're even." Seraphine gave a faint smile and moved forward to help him up. Cassiel saw her outstretched hand, but looking at his mud-covered hands, he didn't take it. Instead, he pushed himself up. He went to the trash can, picked up his dropped backpack, opened the box, and made sure the clean handkerchief inside was still there. Only then did he feel a bit relieved. "Your umbrella is broken. Take mine." "But this umbrella belongs to that convenience store. Don't forget to return it when you're done." "If I take this umbrella, what about you?" "It's okay. I just like getting a bit wet, so I don't need an umbrella." The perceptive Cassiel immediately sensed her strange behavior. "Is there a problem?" "Nothing. Just a family matter." Seeing that it was a family issue, Cassiel didn't think it was appropriate to ask further. But how could he take a girl's umbrella and leave her in the rain? Just as he hesitated, Seraphine thrust the umbrella straight into his hand and then dashed into the thick, dark rain. She soon disappeared from sight. Helplessly, Cassiel had to take the umbrella and go home. That's when I understood why the convenience store's umbrella wasn't at the murder scene. The umbrella was given to Cassiel. In that rain, besides Seraphine walking aimlessly, I saw another figure, Bastien. He was closely following Seraphine through the rain, trying to avoid nearby CCTV cameras. Since I had already interrogated him, I knew Bastien was following her, so I wasn't surprised. I was most curious about what actually happened at the murder scene. I looked at the ghostly Seraphine, standing silently beside me, walking like a corpse right behind me. The cold rain completely soaked Seraphine's body, but she looked entirely numb, aimless, and lost. She unknowingly wandered into an old neighborhood where there were no working CCTV cameras. Finally, she stood lifelessly under a broken awning, staring blankly into the heavy rain. In that moment, I stood next to the floating ghostly Seraphine, watching everything happen from a godlike perspective. I saw Bastien hiding in the dark, typing something rapidly on his phone. Without looking, I knew he was sending Seraphine's location to Callista. It seemed Callista was coming there soon. My mind was already preparing for the impending confrontation. Then, all the people who left their marks on this rainy night began arriving one by one. I saw Draven peeling an apple under a nearby parking shed. He answered a phone call and quickly left. As he left, he put his knife in his pocket. There was no other knife left at the scene. A homeless-looking delivery boy hurried past. That perverted and vile neighbor, wearing a raincoat, snuck into an adult shop, bought some items, and quickly left. People were coming and going around her. Seraphine just stood there under the awning with empty eyes, like a lifeless statue. The world was so big, and she didn't know where to go because she had nowhere to go, so her feet didn't move on their own. After a while, a figure wearing a raincoat appeared nearby. It wasn't very tall. In fact, it was quite short. The shadow slowly walked up to Seraphine, who was still lost in thought. The dim light suddenly stopped, and Seraphine quickly looked up. I was completely stunned. I thought Bastien had called Callista, but I never in my wildest dreams imagined that the person arriving would be Seraphine's half-sister, Astoria. How could Alaric and Callista's daughter come here? My mind filled with questions. I had never even considered this little girl being at the murder scene. But soon, scattered pieces of information about her flashed in my mind. Astoria was exceptionally bright, she had skipped grades, and her academic performance was brilliant. In other words, her mind was very cunning and far more mature than her age. I had completely overlooked her before because of her age, but now it seemed very likely that she had pretended to be her mother and given all these instructions to Bastien. Could a little girl like her really get into an argument with Seraphine that escalated to someone losing their life? I knew that with you in this state, you were destined to be homeless. Seraphine never harbored any ill will toward this younger sister, but she knew very well that Astoria had disliked her since childhood. But even if she disliked her, there was no reason to follow her all this way in the rain in the middle of the night. Did you run all the way here in the middle of the night just to say this? Not at all. I am here to tell you some things clearly. Don't come to my house again. Neither my mother nor I like you. Your own mother is over there. Why do you still want to come here and fight me for my father? Astoria's eyes were filled with bitterness and hatred far beyond her years. You had to run out of the house in the middle of the night just to say this? Some things needed to be said. Let's make everything clear face to face and leave some solid proof so you don't regret it later. Astoria pulled a waterproof envelope from her raincoat pocket. I know you are homeless now. Here, take 1,000 yuan. Keep it, and sign this agreement to sever your relationship with Dad. After this, we will have nothing to do with each other. I finally understood everything. After learning about Seraphine's helpless situation, Astoria wanted to take advantage of her misfortune and force her to sign this absurd agreement to buy her own peace. She had Bastien follow her just to ensure Seraphine truly had no way out. Looking at the agreement Astoria presented, a bitter smile appeared on Seraphine's face. She never imagined things had come to this. In this terrible situation, her own sister was rubbing salt into her wounds. She was completely broken. She no longer cared about those 1,000 yuan. She only cared about her remaining, pitiful dignity. I won't sign. Stop dreaming. Do you still not understand what's going on? You've realized that Dad doesn't care about you at all. He doesn't love you. Look at the weather today. This heavy rain. When you left our house, he didn't say a single word to stop you. Do you know what that means? It means he doesn't consider you his daughter. Astoria's cold words were like jagged shards of poisoned ice, further piercing Seraphine's already broken heart. Those words, he doesn't consider you his daughter. During her mother's illness, this thought had bitten her heart like a venomous snake countless times. But now, in the silence of the night, on a street where the whole world had abandoned her, her own sister announced it like a cruel victor. Seraphine felt as if a deep thread in her mind, one that was just barely holding everything together for the sake of appearances, completely snapped. The despair standing before her engulfed her like a dense fog in an instant. The coldness of being thrown out of her mother's house, the numbness of having nowhere to go, the slow ache of her father's indifference. This was the sound of a broken heart. The truth was, Seraphine knew all these realities, yet she still held onto a faint glimmer of hope for this broken family. It was a very deep longing residing in her soul that made her insist on seeing her father. That last faint glimmer, which refused to extinguish, was ruthlessly put out by Astoria's words and that severance agreement. It felt as if cold hands had buried that final spark into cold, dirty reality. Seraphine's bitter smile froze. She no longer argued, nor made any attempt to justify herself. At this moment, any words seemed incredibly pale and laughable. She felt as if something inside her was rapidly cooling and collapsing. Her heart had been gripped tightly by an invisible hand. A suffocating numbness and coldness spread throughout her entire body. The strength that had held her up until now felt as if it had been drained in an instant. She looked up at Astoria's face, a face full of cunning that looked very much like her father's. "You have money, keep it. I won't sign the agreement." There was no resistance in her voice, just a peace filled with a bone-deep exhaustion. Did it even matter now if she signed it or not? The corner of her heart that once called out for her father had lost its final warmth, just like this cold rain. Her heart was completely dead. "Seraphine, don't be so shameless." Seeing that Seraphine still wouldn't give in, despite her condition, Astoria became utterly enraged. In that exact moment, a cold flash of light glinted, and Seraphine actually pulled a cold fruit knife from her pocket. This was a weapon kept for self-defense that she had brought from her mother's house. Instantly, not only was Astoria terrified, but Bastien, hiding in the dark, also trembled in fear. "Seraphine, what do you want to do? Don't be afraid. I won't sign the agreement. If you want me to sever the relationship, then it's better you just kill me." Seeing that knife in Seraphine's hand and hearing her resolute words, Astoria went blank. But for her own safety, she quickly snatched the knife from Seraphine's hand. At least this way, control would remain in her own hands. Seeing her sister take the knife, Seraphine immediately closed her eyes and spread her arms. It seemed as if she was ready to be cut. But Astoria was ultimately just a little girl. Where would she really get the courage to take someone's life? After waiting for a few seconds and seeing no movement from Astoria, Seraphine suddenly looked at her and gave a cold smile. "Since you won't do anything, this relationship will never end. Do whatever you want." After saying this, Seraphine turned and walked away. Every second spent with her sister reminded her of her father's harsh words. She was just taking out her anger on her domineering sister in the most helpless way. Astoria gripped the knife tightly. She watched Seraphine walking away, and Seraphine's cold smile kept flashing in her mind. She was clearly homeless and defeated, so why did she smile at her like that? Why? Astoria felt an unnamed anger rising within her. She raised the knife and quickly ran after Seraphine. Soon, they both reached a dark and desolate corner where even the streetlights couldn't reach. "Seraphine, stop right there." Seraphine completely ignored her, which fueled Astoria's anger even more. She ran ahead, grabbed Seraphine's clothes, and pulled her toward her with all her might. That forceful pull violently tore Seraphine's soaked shirt. Furious, Seraphine stared expressionlessly at her enraged sister in the dark rain. Suddenly, she reached out and grabbed Astoria's wrist holding the knife. Then she pressed the sharp blade firmly against her own delicate neck. "Have you thought about it? If yes, then do it." The cold rain fell on Astoria's hands and slid down the blade. Seraphine's cold fingers had completely covered Astoria's hand with all her strength, firmly pressing the blade against the vein in her delicate neck. Those eyes, which once held countless emotions, were now completely lifeless and empty. They stared into the void through the rain, as if waiting for a final verdict. "Don't force me. I am only giving you the chance to choose. If you don't choose, then go home. The rain is very heavy." Seraphine's comforting words felt like a massive joke to Astoria. She wanted to see Seraphine's shattered state and her defeat, not this calm and arrogant demeanor. Just as Astoria was on the verge of breaking under this immense psychological pressure, and the knife was almost slipping from her hand, a dark shadow suddenly rushed out from under the awning in the dark. It was Bastien. He had been hiding in the dark, and due to the low light, he could only see a cold knife pressed against Astoria's throat. Terrified, he assumed this dangerous Seraphine had taken his beloved niece hostage. Astoria didn't even get a chance to think further. Bastien rushed out like a scared wild dog. His objective was clear: snatch the knife. He pulled Astoria away, but he never dreamed that this sudden collision would be the final straw. Astoria, already on the verge of breaking, screamed in terror at the sudden appearance of the dark shadow. In an instinctive reaction, she used all her strength to break free from Seraphine's grip. As the dark shadow lunged at Seraphine, Seraphine's body immediately reacted defensively. Right when Astoria forcefully broke free, the street surface was extremely slippery. To regain her balance, Seraphine almost automatically fell forward, initiating a deadly chain reaction. In her terror, Astoria struggled to free herself and lost her balance. Falling, she instinctively tightened her grip to catch onto something, but one of her hands still held the knife. Seraphine slipped on the wet surface and fell forward, while Bastien lunged forward, trying to grab the hand holding the knife with all his might. Those three forces collided in an instant, and that sharp fruit knife traced a very small arc in the dim light. Even amidst the roar of the heavy rain, the sound of something cutting rang out. Time seemed to stop right there. Bastien finally grabbed Astoria's wrist, holding the knife tightly, and breathed a sigh of relief, thinking he had succeeded. Astoria's eyes widened, and her body stiffened. Caught between the two of them, Seraphine trembled slightly. She felt a sharp, intense pain for a split second. She lowered her head. It seemed as if she couldn't understand anything, but that coldness instantly turned into a warmth spreading rapidly down her neck. That warm liquid quickly soaked her cold, wet clothes. The confusion in her eyes hadn't faded yet, but a very deep and complete feeling of relief washed over her. Not a single sound of pain escaped her mouth. All her strength drained away like an ebbing tide, and she gently fell backward, crashing heavily onto the cold, waterlogged ground. The splashing water quickly mixed with the deep red liquid spreading around her. Her eyes, staring into the endless darkness, moved past Bastien's shocked and distorted face, past Astoria's pale and terrified face, and finally lost all their light. Numb, Bastien lowered his head. Seeing the horrifying red blood dripping from the blade he had just snatched, he jerked his head toward the blood-soaked Seraphine. His mind went completely blank. He didn't even know if his own hand, colliding with Astoria's, had cut Seraphine, or if Seraphine's throat was already cut before he got there. A massive terror enveloped Bastien. At this moment, Astoria was thinking the exact same thing. She didn't know whose fault it was. This was a very serious crime of murder. She jerked her hand back, and the blood-stained fruit knife fell into a puddle. She stumbled backward, her face covered in tears and rainwater. All her passion and anger were gone, leaving only a very deep, primal terror. Bastien froze completely in place, like a statue washed in the rain. This was absolutely not his intention. He just wanted to pull Astoria away from there. After the murder, they were both standing there numbly when they heard footsteps. Astoria, who had just been terrified, suddenly became serious. She picked up the murder weapon, grabbed Bastien, and ran away without looking back. For a brief moment, I hesitated, looking at the lifeless Seraphine lying in the cold rain. My heart hurt so much that I couldn't even breathe. I wanted to pick her up, but the ghostly Seraphine floating next to me stopped me. Following her gaze, I looked in the direction they had run. I understood what she meant. I was just a spectator here. I needed to see the rest of the truth. How these two escaped police interrogation and investigation. With a heavy heart, I followed Astoria and Bastien. They ran and stopped in an even more desolate corner. What do we do now? This is really bad. This is a huge issue. What will happen when the police ask? What should I do? Don't panic. The rain is very heavy. There are no CCTV cameras here either. We will escape. Uncle, the girl you were supposed to meet today, is she at home? But I'm not dating her. That's very easy. Just agree to date her and ask her to provide a solid alibi for you. The police won't believe that you were at home meeting your girlfriend, but left her alone to go out in the rain and killed a girl you have nothing to do with. Looking at a criminal's behavior, motive, and opportunity, you don't fit any of those criteria. But what if the police thoroughly investigate me? I'll get caught eventually, right? Uncle, how do you know even less than me? When the police investigate suspects, they won't pick someone whose chances of being involved in this case are very low. Even if the police find evidence that you went out, what about the murder weapon? Seraphine brought this knife herself. Who knew she was walking around with a knife? The fact that this was her murder weapon, no one will ever be able to explain it. Not even the police will figure this out. Hearing Astoria's words, a shiver ran down my spine. This little girl possessed a wisdom far beyond her years, and she was terrifyingly calm. Her words instantly calmed the panicked Bastien. But what about you? There are CCTV cameras in your building's elevator. How will you explain being caught coming out? Astoria replied. I didn't use the elevator when I came down. I sneaked out without telling my parents, so I deliberately used the stairs to avoid the cameras. When I return home and go back up the stairs, the elevator will only show the video of me returning in the afternoon. I suddenly understood everything. It was no surprise that during my previous investigation, there was no record of anyone from Seraphine's family going out. Astoria had hidden this from her parents. Her deliberate avoidance of CCTV cameras became the key to evading police interrogation. If she hadn't planned the murder in advance, why would she avoid cameras? If she had planned it, why did the victim bring the murder weapon herself? These contradictory facts, along with the testimony of that pervert passing by who attempted rape and fled, and the destruction caused by this heavy rain, completely derailed the entire police investigation. This was the whole truth hidden behind that unsolved case of my past life. Both suspects in the involuntary manslaughter had solid alibis. No one had planned the murder in advance, and no one had prepared the murder weapon. Under the cover of this heavy rain, this case, full of coincidences, became an almost unsolvable perfect crime. Watching those two shadows leave, I felt only profound sorrow. Who was the real killer? Was it Bastien or Astoria? This fact could never be proven now. But before either of them did anything, Seraphine was already dead inside. What truly took her life was her broken family, her indifferent father, and her crazy mother. As I was drowning in this guilt, a small, cold hand gently touched my cheek. Feeling that cold touch, I snapped out of my thoughts, turned my head, and saw the ghostly shadow of Seraphine floating in the air, looking at me with eyes full of love and pity. "Let it end here," she finally said. That familiar voice, carrying so much pain, echoed in my ears again after 10 years, but it held a heartbreaking sadness. Was I dreaming? Or had I not said anything yet? Before I could ask anything, she extended a slender, beautiful finger and gently placed it on my lips. "It doesn't matter anymore. Everything is over." Was everything really over? You took responsibilities on your shoulders that you shouldn't have. You carried the burden of sins that weren't yours. I watched you every day. I've watched you torture yourself in that madness for 10 years. Now it's time to end this. You have investigated everything you needed to investigate. Now this truth has no meaning because my heart was dead before that knife even fell. My heart trembled. I finally understood her mental state at that time. The world's greatest tragedy is a dead heart. When the whole world had abandoned her, she didn't care whether her body was alive or not. In that moment, that knife was also a kind of freedom for her. She just never imagined that my inability to stop her here would lead me to try and resolve this pain-filled story. This story became a 10-year chain that bound me in sin and regret. If you let it all go, I can leave in peace. This sin shouldn't be yours, and you don't need to carry this burden. Cherish your today. She is still waiting for you to return home. Don't neglect the person you should give the most love to today because of the madness of your past. Hearing this, I trembled. Yes, I have been living in the madness of my past. I even risked stepping outside the boundaries of the law to find the truth. If this continued, I would truly be ruined. Looking at the dreamlike Seraphine standing before me, I couldn't tell if this was truly a merging of our souls or just an illusion created by my own mind to save myself. But whether it was true or not, I had to make her a promise so she could leave in peace. I understand. This matter is resolved now. Don't worry. I will no longer live in my past. Hearing my promise, a heartfelt and peaceful smile finally appeared on Seraphine's face. The next moment, the cold, rainy night around me began to twist and disappear. When I opened my eyes, it was the next morning. The heavy rain had stopped a long time ago, and bright sunlight was shining in the washed sky. Waking up after sleeping the whole night, I felt that all the darkness hovering over my heart had completely cleared. The rain had stopped, the sky had cleared, and everything around me looked very crisp. I didn't know if it was the wind blowing on the roof that had dried them, or if this was a miracle that couldn't be explained. I stood up and looked at the sun-bathed city in the distance. Whether this was a dream or reality, it didn't matter to me. From that strange dream last night, I completely understood everything about my past life. Seraphine's death was neither a mere coincidence nor was it inevitable. It was a tragic event born from the destruction of her family, countless unfortunate moments, and profound despair. As long as I am here, I will never let that happen again. When I reached home, it was quiet. I tiptoed into the living room and immediately saw Seraphine curled up and sleeping on the sofa, wrapped in a thin blanket. She was fast asleep. During the storm last night, she got scared of the lightning and didn't go back to her comfortable guest room, but curled up and slept on the living room sofa instead. I figured she must have stayed up late waiting for me to return. Seeing her peaceful sleeping face and feeling her deep dependence on me, I couldn't help but smile. I walked over to her, tucked her well into the blanket, and then turned back toward my room. After getting drenched in the rain all night, I quickly took a hot shower to wash off the body's chill. When I came back into the living room dressed, Seraphine was still fast asleep. She must have stayed awake for a very long time worrying about me last night. Seeing her sleeping so deeply, I didn't dare to wake her up. What's past is past. From today onward, I will only live for this lively girl right in front of me. Thank you so much guys for watching till the end. If you are new to the channel, make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell notification because I keep bringing amazing anime, manga, and web novel stories just like this. Be sure to comment and tell me what your favorite moment of this story was and how many points out of 10 you would rate this story. I will see you with another fantastic story. Until then, take care and bye-bye.